transformation that would forever alter the destiny of the Necron race began in the deepest vaults of their tomb cities, where ancient biotransference furnaces hummed with eldritch energies. The Sautekh Dynasty, among the most powerful of the Necron noble houses, witnessed their entire civilization undergo a metamorphosis that stripped away everything that had once made them truly alive. The process itself was both magnificent and horrifying in its scope. Millions upon millions of Necron bodies were systematically broken down at the molecular level, their consciousness transferred into bodies of living metal that would endure for eternity. For the nobility of the Sautekh Dynasty, the biotransference carried particular significance. Unlike the common warriors who emerged as mindless automata, the higher-ranking members of their society retained varying degrees of their original personalities and memories. The Phaerons, overlords, and lords of the Sautekh maintained their strategic acumen, their ambitions, and crucially, their capacity for independent thought. This preservation of intellect among the ruling class was no accident. The Khatan had deliberately engineered the process to maintain a functional command structure, while ensuring the vast majority of the Necron race would serve as unquestioning soldiers. The transformation affected each member of the Sautekh nobility differently. Some emerged from the furnaces with their memories largely intact, their personalities merely filtered through the cold logic of their new mechanical forms. Others found themselves changed in fundamental ways, their emotions muted or entirely absent, their thoughts running along new pathways carved by alien technology. The process created a hierarchy of consciousness within the dynasty, with those of higher rank generally retaining more of their original selves, though even they were forever changed by the experience. The living metal bodies that housed the Sautekh nobility were marvels of technology that far exceeded their original biological forms. These new vessels granted them incredible durability, the ability to repair themselves from even catastrophic damage, and freedom from the genetic curse that had plagued their species for millennia. Yet the cost was immeasurable. They had traded their souls for immortality, becoming something fundamentally different from what they had been. The Sautekh nobles found themselves capable of strategic thinking and long-term planning on scales that would have been impossible for mortal minds, but they also discovered that certain aspects of existence that had once driven them were now distant memories. The war in heaven that followed the biotransference saw the newly created Necrons unleashed upon the galaxy with devastating effect. The Sautekh Dynasty played a crucial role in this cosmic conflict, their fleets and legions striking at the Old Ones and their client races across multiple star systems. The war raged for millennia, reshaping the very fabric of reality as the Khatan fed upon stellar energy and entire civilizations were consumed in the conflagration. The Sautekh forces proved particularly effective in void warfare, their tomb ships capable of withstanding punishment that would have destroyed lesser vessels while delivering firepower that could crack planets. The conflict reached its climax when the Necrons turned against their Khatan masters, fragmenting these star gods into countless shards that could be contained and controlled. This rebellion was orchestrated by Sautekh the Silent King, the supreme ruler of the Necron race, who had finally recognized the true cost of the bargain his people had made. The Sautekh Dynasty, like all others, followed the Silent King's commands in this final phase of the war, their forces instrumental in the capture and imprisonment of the Khatan fragments. With the war in heaven concluded and the galaxy left scarred and depleted, Sautekh issued the command that would define the next 60 million years of Necron history. The Great Sleep was to begin immediately, with all Necron forces withdrawing to specially constructed tomb worlds where they would enter stasis until the galaxy had recovered sufficiently to support their eventual return. This decision was born of both practical necessity and strategic foresight. The Necrons had expended enormous resources in their wars, and the galaxy itself was so damaged that immediate conquest would have been Pyrrhic at best. The Silent King's command carried the weight of absolute authority, and the Sautekh Dynasty responded with the same discipline they had shown throughout the war in heaven. Their nobles began the complex process of organizing the withdrawal of their forces, coordinating with other dynasties to ensure the orderly transition to the Great Sleep. The scale of this undertaking was staggering. Entire fleets had to be recalled from distant campaigns, legions of warriors needed to be transported to designated tomb worlds, and the vast infrastructure of the Necron war machine required careful preservation for future awakening. The construction of tomb worlds across the former territories of the Sautekh Dynasty represented one of the greatest engineering projects in galactic history. These were not merely burial sites, but sophisticated fortress worlds designed to protect sleeping Necron forces for millions of years, while maintaining the complex systems necessary for eventual reactivation. The Sautekh Dynasty's tomb worlds were primarily located in the galactic core regions, areas that had been the heart of their pre-biotransference empire and offered both strategic value and relative security from external threats. Each tomb world was a masterpiece of Necron technology, featuring multiple layers of defensive systems, self-repair mechanisms, and stasis chambers capable of preserving millions of warriors in perfect condition. The construction process required the transformation of entire planets, with their cores hollowed out and replaced with vast networks of corridors, chambers, and control systems. The Sautekh Dynasty's tomb worlds were particularly notable for their sophisticated command and control networks, designed to maintain communication between different sites and coordinate awakening procedures when the time came. The distribution of these tomb worlds followed careful strategic planning, with major sites established at key points throughout the Sautekh Dynasty's former territory. Some were hidden in systems that appeared barren and lifeless, their presence masked by sophisticated cloaking technologies. Others were placed in locations that would become important in the far future, positioned to control vital trade routes or strategic resources. The Sautekh planners demonstrated remarkable foresight in their selection of sites, choosing locations that would remain relatively stable over geological timescales while offering maximum strategic advantage upon awakening. The tomb worlds also served as repositories for the dynasty's accumulated knowledge and technology. Vast data crypts stored the military doctrines, scientific discoveries, and cultural memories of the Sautekh dynasty, ensuring that this information would survive the long sleep. Weapon stockpiles, manufacturing facilities, and fleet anchorages were carefully preserved, ready to support immediate military operations upon awakening. The tomb worlds were designed to function as complete military-industrial complexes, capable of supporting renewed conquest without requiring external resources. The process of entering the Great Sleep was itself a complex undertaking that required careful coordination across the entire dynasty. Necron nobles had to ensure that their forces were properly positioned, that all necessary systems were in place, and that the awakening protocols were correctly programmed. The Sautekh dynasty's leadership took particular care to establish clear chains of command for the eventual awakening, recognizing that the success of their future campaigns would depend on maintaining organizational coherence across millions of years of dormancy. As the Great Sleep began, the Silent King made his most momentous decision. He would not join his people in stasis, but would instead depart the galaxy entirely, venturing into the intergalactic void beyond the reach of any potential threat. This exodus was driven by multiple factors, including his desire to scout for potential future threats and his need to find some form of redemption for the choices he had made during the biotransference. The Silent King's departure created an unprecedented situation within the Necron hierarchy, as the supreme authority that had unified the race for millions of years would no longer be present to provide guidance or resolve disputes. The power vacuum left by Zarek's departure had profound implications for the Sautekh dynasty and all other Necron factions. Without the Silent King's overriding authority, each dynasty would be free to pursue its own agenda upon awakening, potentially leading to conflicts between different Necron factions. The Sautekh dynasty's nobles recognized this possibility and took steps to ensure their own independence and security, establishing protocols that would allow them to operate effectively without central coordination. The Silent King's exodus also meant that the awakening process would be largely autonomous, with each tomb world relying on its own systems, and programming to determine when and how to emerge from the Great Sleep. This decentralized approach offered both advantages and risks. While it provided flexibility and reduced the chance of total system failure, it also meant that the awakening would be uncoordinated and potentially chaotic. The Sautekh Dynasty's tomb worlds were programmed with sophisticated decision, making algorithms designed to assess galactic conditions and determine optimal awakening times. But these systems would operate without the benefit of centralized intelligence or coordination. The departure of the Silent King marked the end of an era for the Necron race and the beginning of a new phase in their existence. For the Sautekh Dynasty, it represented both an opportunity and a challenge. They would have greater freedom to pursue their own objectives upon awakening, but they would also face the galaxy without the unifying presence that had guided them through their greatest trials. The tomb worlds settled into their long vigil, their sleeping occupants unaware of the changes that would reshape the galaxy during their absence. While deep in the intergalactic void, the Silent King began his own journey of discovery and potential redemption. The first stirrings of consciousness came not as a gentle awakening, but as a cascade of system diagnostics flooding through neural pathways that had remained dormant for over 60 million years. Deep within the primary stasis chamber of Mandragora's greatest tomb complex, Imotekh the Stormlord felt the familiar weight of his necrodermis body as power cells throughout his form began their reactivation sequences. The tomb world's central cogitator arrays had detected specific galactic conditions that matched the predetermined awakening parameters, triggering a process that would restore one of the most brilliant military minds the galaxy had ever known. Mandragora itself bore little resemblance to the world that had served as the Sautekh Dynasty's crown world during the final days of the war in heaven. The planet's surface had been completely transformed during the construction of the tomb complexes, its original topography replaced by a network of defensive installations, monitoring stations, and access points to the vast underground cities that housed millions of sleeping Necron warriors. The world's crust had been reinforced with living metal supports, creating a planetary fortress capable of withstanding bombardment from orbit while concealing the true extent of the facilities beneath. The awakening process followed protocols established millions of years earlier, beginning with the restoration of command-level personnel before proceeding to the broader military formations. Imotekh's personal stasis chamber occupied the center of a vast control nexus, surrounded by banks of monitoring equipment that had tracked galactic conditions throughout the Great Sleep. As his consciousness fully returned, streams of data began flowing into his awareness, providing him with an initial assessment of the galaxy's current state that would prove both illuminating and deeply concerning. The reports painted a picture of a galaxy transformed beyond recognition. Where once the Necron Empire had held dominion over vast swathes of space, younger races now claimed territory that had belonged to the Necron tier for millions of years before the biotransference. The primitive mammals that had scurried in the shadows during the war in heaven had evolved into spacefaring civilizations, establishing their own empires across former Necron holdings. Most troubling of all, these upstart species showed no awareness of their trespass, treating ancient Necron worlds as if they were unclaimed territory ripe for colonization. Imotekh processed this information with the cold efficiency that had made him one of the most feared strategists of the pre-sleep era. His analytical mind cataloged each piece of data, cross-referencing current galactic conditions with strategic assessments that had been prepared before the Great Sleep. The scale of the challenge before him was immense, but rather than feeling overwhelmed, he experienced something approaching satisfaction. The galaxy had provided him with exactly the kind of complex strategic puzzle that had always brought out his best qualities as a military commander. The primary threat assessment identified several major powers that had established themselves across former Sautekh territory. The Imperium of Man dominated vast regions of space, its sprawling bureaucracy and massive military forces controlling thousands of worlds that had once been Necron strongholds. This human empire displayed a curious mixture of advanced technology and primitive superstition, wielding weapons that could crack continents while worshipping a corpse emperor as a deity. Their expansion had been particularly aggressive in the galactic core regions, placing them in direct conflict with awakening tomb worlds across multiple sectors. The Orc menace had also grown considerably during the Great Sleep, with massive Wa migrations carving paths of destruction through regions that had once been carefully ordered Necron territories. These greenskin barbarians showed no respect for the ancient claims of the Necron dynasties, treating tomb worlds as convenient sources of scrap metal and exotic technology. Several Sautekh tomb complexes had already been compromised by Orc invasions, their defensive systems overwhelmed by sheer numbers and the chaotic nature of greenskin warfare. More concerning still were the activities of the Eldar, those arrogant survivors of the war in heaven who had somehow managed to avoid the complete destruction that should have been their fate. The pointed-ear xenos had established craft worlds and hidden enclaves throughout the galaxy, their seers and farseers constantly meddling in affairs that did not concern them. Intelligence reports suggested that some Eldar factions possessed detailed knowledge of Necron tomb world locations, information they had used to conduct preemptive strikes against awakening dynasties. The awakening protocols that Imotekh had established before the Great Sleep proved their worth as tomb worlds across the Sautekh Dynasty's former territory began responding to his command signals. The reactivation process was not simultaneous, but followed a carefully orchestrated sequence that prioritized strategic locations while maintaining operational security. Each tomb world's awakening was coordinated through quantum entanglement communicators that had maintained their connection across the vast spans of time and space, allowing Imotekh to monitor the status of his forces as they emerged from their long slumber. The first wave of awakenings focused on tomb worlds in relatively secure locations, sites that had remained undisturbed during the Great Sleep and possessed the infrastructure necessary to support immediate military operations. These initial awakenings served multiple purposes, providing Imotekh with secure bases of operation, while also testing the reliability of systems that had remained dormant for millions of years. The success rate was remarkably high, testament to the engineering excellence of the original tomb world construction projects. Mandragora's own awakening proceeded according to the most sophisticated protocols in the Sautekh Dynasty's arsenal. The tomb world's defensive systems came online in stages, with passive sensors conducting detailed scans of the surrounding star system before more obvious military installations revealed their presence. The planet's surface installations emerged from concealment like flowers blooming in fast forward, revealing weapon batteries, communication arrays, and fleet anchorages that had been hidden beneath false terrain for millions of years. The reactivation of the Sautekh Dynasty's command structure required careful attention to the hierarchical relationships that had been established before the Great Sleep. Imotekh's position as the dynasty's supreme military commander had been clearly defined in the pre-sleep protocols, but the awakening process still required formal confirmation of his authority over subordinate nobles and their forces. This process was complicated by the fact that some tomb worlds had experienced partial failures during the Great Sleep, resulting in the loss of key personnel or the corruption of command protocols. The systematic nature of Imotekh's approach to the awakening process reflected his understanding that the Sautekh Dynasty's future success would depend on maintaining strict organizational discipline. Each awakening tomb world was required to submit detailed status reports, including assessments of their military capabilities, resource stockpiles, and any external threats they had detected. This information was compiled into comprehensive databases that allowed Imotekh to develop accurate pictures of his available forces and the strategic situation in different regions of space. The intelligence gathered during the initial awakening phase revealed that the galaxy's younger races had developed military capabilities that, while primitive compared to Necron technology, were nonetheless formidable in their own right. Human Imperial Guard regiments fielded massive armies equipped with weapons that could threaten individual Necron warriors, while their Space Marine forces demonstrated tactical flexibility and individual combat prowess that demanded respect. The Orcs had evolved new forms of warfare that that relied on overwhelming numbers and unpredictable tactics, making them dangerous opponents despite their technological inferiority. Imotekh's analysis of these threats led him to several key strategic conclusions that would shape his approach to reclaiming the Sautekh Dynasty's former territories. The younger races had grown too numerous and too well established to be simply swept aside through brute force, as might have been possible during the immediate aftermath of the war in Heaven. Instead, the reconquest would require sophisticated strategies that exploited the weaknesses of these civilizations, while maximizing the advantages of Necron technology and immortal patience. The first phase of Imotekh's grand strategy focused on establishing secure base areas from which larger operations could be launched. This approach required the identification of tomb worlds that could serve as regional command centers, coordinating the activities of smaller installations while providing the logistical support necessary for sustained military campaigns. The selection of these primary bases took into account both their strategic location and their current security status, prioritizing sites that offered maximum operational flexibility while minimizing the risk of premature discovery by enemy forces. The reactivation of the Sautekh Dynasty's manufacturing capabilities represented another crucial element of Imotekh's strategic planning. The tomb worlds contained vast industrial complexes capable of producing everything from individual weapons to entire fleets, but these facilities required careful restoration after their long dormancy. The awakening protocols included detailed procedures for bringing production lines back online, testing quality control systems, and verifying that the automated manufacturing processes could still produce equipment to the exacting standards required by Necron military doctrine. Resource allocation became a critical concern as more tomb worlds came online and began requesting supplies and reinforcements. Imotekh's command staff, consisting of overlords and lords who had served under him before the Great Sleep, worked to establish priority systems that ensured the most strategically important locations received adequate support while maintaining reserves for unexpected contingencies. This process required constant adjustment as new intelligence reports revealed changing conditions in different sectors of space. The psychological impact of the awakening on the Sautekh Dynasty's noble class varied considerably depending on individual circumstances and the length of their dormancy. Some overlords emerged from stasis with their memories and personalities largely intact, ready to resume their previous roles with minimal adjustment. Others found themselves changed by the experience, their thought patterns altered by the extended period of inactivity or by minor malfunctions in their stasis systems. Imotekh recognized that managing these variations in mental state would be crucial to maintaining effective command and control over his forces. The discovery that several tomb worlds had been partially compromised during the Great Sleep presented immediate tactical challenges that required careful resolution. In some cases, external forces had breached outer defensive perimeters without penetrating to the core stasis chambers, creating situations where awakening Necron forces found themselves surrounded by hostile troops. Other tomb worlds had suffered internal system failures that resulted in the loss of significant numbers of warriors or the corruption of vital databases containing strategic information. These compromised installations required immediate attention to prevent their complete loss or capture by enemy forces. Imotekh deployed rapid response forces from secure tomb worlds to reinforce threatened positions, while also implementing contingency protocols designed to prevent the capture of sensitive technology or intelligence. The success of these operations demonstrated the value of the redundant command systems that had been built into the original tomb world designs, allowing damaged installations to continue functioning even after suffering significant losses. The awakening process across the Sautekh Dynasty's territorial holdings revealed the true scope of their ancient empire, with tomb worlds scattered throughout the galactic core in a pattern that reflected both strategic necessity and the political realities of the pre-biotransference era. These installations formed a network of interconnected strongholds that had been positioned to control key stellar phenomena, trade routes, and resource-rich systems that would remain valuable regardless of which younger races eventually claimed dominion over the surrounding regions. The concentration of Sautekh tomb worlds in the galactic core was no accident. This region offered both the gravitational stability necessary for long-term stasis operations and proximity to the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's heart, whose exotic energies could be harnessed by sufficiently advanced Necron technology. The strategic importance of the galactic core extended beyond mere resource considerations to encompass the fundamental nature of interstellar travel and communication. The dense stellar environment created natural choke points that any expanding civilization would eventually need to control, making the region an inevitable flashpoint for conflicts between different species. The Sautekh Dynasty's tomb world placement allowed them to monitor and potentially interdict traffic between the galaxy's major spiral arms, giving them leverage over trade and military movements on a galactic scale. This positioning also provided early warning of any major threats emerging from the galactic rim, allowing the dynasty to prepare appropriate responses before hostile forces could penetrate deep into their territory. The tomb worlds themselves varied considerably in size and specialization, reflecting the different roles they had been designed to fulfill within the broader Sautekh military structure. The largest installations, designated as crown worlds, served as regional command centers capable of coordinating operations across multiple star systems while housing the most senior members of the dynasty's nobility. These massive complexes extended deep into their host planets' crusts, with some reaching down to the mantle layers where geothermal energy could supplement their primary power sources. The engineering required to create such installations had transformed entire worlds into artificial constructs, their original geological features replaced by vast networks of corridors, chambers, and defensive installations. Mandragora stood as the premier example of Sautekh tomb world construction, its surface dominated by towering spires that served as both communication arrays and weapon platforms. The planet's defensive capabilities had been integrated into its very structure, with the crust itself serving as armor plating for the installations beneath. Massive Tesla destructors emerged from concealed positions across the surface, their crackling energy discharges capable of reducing attacking fleets to constituent atoms. The world's polar regions housed launch bays for the dynasty's tomb ship fleets, with underground manufacturing facilities capable of producing replacement vessels as needed. The hierarchical structure of the Sautekh dynasty reflected the rigid social stratification that had characterized Necron-tier society before the biotransference, though the mechanical nature of their new forms had introduced certain modifications to traditional relationships. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the Phaeron, the supreme ruler of the dynasty, whose authority derived from both ancient bloodline claims and demonstrated military competence. The position carried absolute power over all dynasty resources and personnel, though the practical exercise of this authority required constant attention to the competing interests of subordinate nobles who retained their own ambitions and territorial claims. Beneath the Phaeron, the overlords commanded individual tomb worlds or major military formations, their status determined by a combination of pre-biotransference rank, the strategic importance of their holdings, and their success in post-awakening operations. These nobles maintained their own courts and military forces, creating a feudal structure that balanced central authority with local autonomy. The relationship between overlords and their superiors was governed by complex protocols that had evolved over millions of years, incorporating both traditional Necron-tier customs and the practical requirements of coordinating immortal beings whose memories spanned geological ages. The lords who served under the overlords commanded smaller formations and installations, their authority typically extending over specific military units or specialized facilities. These positions often served as proving grounds for ambitious nobles seeking advancement within the dynasty's hierarchy, creating a competitive environment that encouraged tactical innovation and operational excellence. The mechanical nature of Necron physiology meant that traditional markers of age and experience were less relevant than they had been during the dynasty's organic phase, allowing for rapid promotion based purely on demonstrated competence. Below the noble ranks, the vast majority of the dynasty's forces consisted of Necron warriors, the reanimated forms of common soldiers and civilians who had undergone biotransference with minimal retention of their original personalities. These units formed the backbone of Sautekh military power, their standardized equipment and programming allowing for seamless integration into larger formations regardless of their tomb world of origin. The warriors' lack of individual initiative was compensated by their absolute reliability and their ability to function effectively even when cut off from higher command authority for extended periods. The Triarch Praetorians occupied a unique position within this hierarchy, serving as interdynastic agents whose authority transcended the traditional boundaries between different Necron factions. These ancient warriors had been selected before the Great Sleep to serve as guardians of Necron unity and tradition, their role becoming even more crucial after the Silent King's departure left the various dynasties without central coordination. The Praetorians maintained their own command structure parallel to the dynastic hierarchies, with the authority to intervene in situations where interdynastic cooperation was required or where traditional protocols were being violated. Within the Sautekh Dynasty's territory, the Triarch Praetorians served as both diplomatic envoys and military advisors, their presence at major tomb worlds ensuring that local commanders remained aware of broader strategic considerations. Their distinctive rod-form weapons and traditional armor marked them as representatives of the ancient Triarch, the ruling council that had governed the Necron race before the rise of the Silent King. The Praetorians' ability to move freely between different dynastic territories made them valuable sources of intelligence about conditions throughout the galaxy, though their loyalty to abstract principles rather than specific rulers sometimes created tension with local commanders. The military assets available to the Sautekh Dynasty represented the accumulated military production of one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, with stockpiles that had been carefully preserved throughout the Great Sleep. The dynasty's tomb ship fleets formed the core of their interstellar capabilities, with vessels ranging from fast attack craft designed for raiding operations to massive battleships capable of engaging entire enemy fleets. These ships incorporated living metal construction that allowed them to repair battle damage automatically, while their weapon systems could devastate planets or crack the hulls of space stations with equal efficiency. The tomb ship's design philosophy emphasized durability and firepower over speed or maneuverability, reflecting the Necron approach to warfare that favored overwhelming technological superiority over tactical finesse. The largest vessels in the Sautekh fleet were the Cairn-class tomb ships, massive constructs that served as mobile command centers and manufacturing facilities. These ships could operate independently for centuries, their internal systems capable of producing replacement warriors and equipment, while their command facilities coordinated operations across multiple star systems. Supporting the tomb ship fleets were vast numbers of monoliths, the iconic floating fortresses that served as both battlefield command posts and mobile weapon platforms. These pyramidal constructs incorporated some of the most advanced technology in the Necron arsenal, including dimensional manipulation systems that allowed them to teleport across vast distances or phase through solid matter. The monolith's Gauss flux arcs could strip the electrons from enemy vehicles and personnel, reducing them to their component atoms in seconds, while their particle whips provided precision fire support for ground operations. The Sautekh Dynasty's ground forces were organized around core formations of Necron warriors supported by specialized units equipped for specific battlefield roles. Immortals provided heavy weapons support with their Gauss blasters and Tesla carbines, their enhanced durability allowing them to hold key positions against overwhelming enemy numbers. Deathmarks served as precision elimination specialists, their dimensional oubliettes allowing them to appear anywhere on the battlefield to eliminate high-value targets with their synaptic disintegrator rifles. The dynasty's vehicle assets included extensive formations of ghost arcs and night scythes, transport craft that could deliver warriors directly to combat zones while providing fire support with their built-in weapon systems. These vehicles incorporated the same living metal technology as the larger tomb ships, allowing them to continue operating even after sustaining damage that would disable conventional aircraft. The Ghost Ark's quantum shielding and repair scarabs made them nearly indestructible, while their Gauss flare arrays could sweep enemy infantry from the battlefield. Heavier support came from annihilation barges and doomsday arcs, mobile weapon platforms that could engage enemy armor and fortifications with devastating effect. The Annihilation barge's twin-linked Tesla destructors created cascading electrical storms that could disable entire enemy formations, while their quantum shielding provided protection against return fire. The Doomsday Arcs carried the fearsome Doomsday Cannons, weapons capable of cracking fortress walls or destroying enemy vehicles with single shots. The organization of these military assets followed protocols established during the War in Heaven, with standardized unit compositions that allowed for easy coordination between forces from different tomb worlds. Each major installation maintained its own complement of warriors and vehicles, while regional command centers coordinated larger formations for major operations. The modular nature of Necron military organization meant that forces could be rapidly reconfigured to meet changing tactical requirements, with units from multiple tomb worlds combining into temporary formations under unified command. The defensive capabilities of individual tomb worlds represented another crucial component of the dynasty's military strength, with each installation designed to withstand prolonged siege operations while maintaining the ability to launch counterattacks against besieging forces. The tomb world's defensive systems operated on multiple levels, from orbital weapon platforms that could engage enemy fleets to underground bunker complexes that could shelter millions of warriors during surface bombardments. These defenses were integrated into the planet's geological structures, making them nearly impossible to eliminate without destroying the worlds themselves. The most sophisticated defensive installations incorporated dimensional manipulation technology that could phase sections of the tomb world out of normal space-time, making them temporarily invulnerable to conventional attacks. These systems required enormous amounts of energy to operate, drawing power from the planet's cores or from captured stellar energy transmitted through quantum entanglement networks. The defensive protocols could be activated automatically in response to specific threat conditions, allowing tomb worlds to protect themselves even when their command staff were in stasis. The coordination of these vast military assets required communication systems that could operate across interstellar distances without relying on conventional transmission methods that could be intercepted or jammed by enemy forces. The Sautekh Dynasty employed quantum entanglement communicators that provided instantaneous communication between tomb worlds regardless of distance, though the energy requirements limited their use to high-priority transmissions. These systems had remained functional throughout the Great Sleep, allowing awakening tomb worlds to immediately re-establish contact with their command hierarchy. The quantum entanglement networks that connected the Sautekh Dynasty's tomb worlds carried more than mere status reports and resource requisitions. They transmitted the strategic vision of a mind that had spent 60 million years in contemplation of warfare's infinite possibilities. Imotech's awakening had not dulled his tactical acumen, but refined it, his consciousness having processed theoretical scenarios and strategic permutations throughout the long sleep with the tireless efficiency of his mechanical brain. The galaxy that greeted his return presented challenges that would have overwhelmed lesser commanders, but for the Stormlord, the complex web of competing civilizations and conflicting interests represented the ultimate strategic puzzle. His approach to multi-system campaigns demonstrated a level of coordination that the younger races could barely comprehend, let alone counter, where human Imperial commanders struggled to maintain coherent strategies across single sectors. Imotekh orchestrated operations spanning dozens of star systems with clockwork precision. The key to this capability lay not merely in superior technology, but in his fundamental understanding of warfare as a multidimensional art form that extended far beyond simple tactical engagements. Each campaign element served multiple purposes within his grand designs, with diversionary attacks in one sector supporting primary objectives hundreds of light years away. The Stormlord's strategic methodology relied heavily on the principle of temporal displacement, using the Necron's effective immortality to implement plans that unfolded over decades or centuries. While enemy commanders focused on immediate tactical concerns, Imotekh positioned his forces for conflicts that might not begin for years, establishing supply caches and forward bases in systems that appeared strategically irrelevant until his true intentions became clear. This long-term approach allowed him to achieve strategic surprise even when his enemies possessed detailed intelligence about his current force dispositions. The coordination of these extended campaigns required communication systems that operated beyond the limitations of conventional astropathic networks or mechanical transmission methods. Imotekh's command structure utilized quantum-entangled communication nodes that provided instantaneous coordination across vast distances, allowing him to adjust tactical parameters in real time as battlefield conditions changed. These systems had been refined during the War in Heaven to operate under the most adverse conditions, maintaining functionality even when subjected to psychic interference or exotic energy weapons that could disrupt conventional communications. The strategic deployment of dolmen gates represented perhaps the most crucial element of Imotekh's tactical superiority, transforming the fundamental nature of interstellar warfare through their ability to bypass conventional travel limitations. These ancient constructs, remnants of the War in Heaven era, created stable wormhole connections between distant locations, allowing Necron forces to appear anywhere in the galaxy with minimal warning. The gate's operation required precise calibration and enormous energy expenditures, but their strategic value far exceeded these costs when properly employed as part of coordinated offensive operations. Imotekh's mastery of dolmen gate deployment went beyond simple troop transportation to encompass sophisticated strategic deceptions and multi-vector attacks that left enemy commanders struggling to predict where his forces might appear next. A single gate network could support simultaneous assaults on targets separated by thousands of light years, creating the impression of vastly larger forces than actually existed while preventing enemies from concentrating their defenses effectively. The psychological impact of these sudden appearances often proved as valuable as their tactical advantages, with enemy morale collapsing as commanders realized their defensive positions could be bypassed at will. The construction and maintenance of dolmen gate networks required careful integration with existing tomb world infrastructure, as the gates drew power from the same exotic energy sources that sustained Necron civilization. Imotekh's engineers had developed sophisticated protocols for establishing temporary gate connections using portable generators, allowing tactical-level deployment of small units behind enemy lines or rapid extraction of forces from untenable positions. These mobile gates lacked the stability and capacity of permanent installations, but provided operational flexibility that proved invaluable during fluid combat situations. The strategic implications of dolmen gate technology extended beyond immediate military applications to encompass broader questions of territorial control and resource management. Traditional concepts of defensive depth became meaningless when enemy forces could appear anywhere within defended space, forcing fundamental changes in military doctrine and base construction. Imotekh exploited this reality by establishing gate networks that created overlapping fields of fire and mutual support between installations that appeared geographically isolated, turning apparent weaknesses into carefully constructed traps. The integration of inertialess drives with dolmen gate networks created even more sophisticated deployment options, allowing Necron fleets to achieve tactical positions that conventional physics would render impossible. These exotic propulsion systems operated by manipulating gravitational fields and space-time curvature, enabling instantaneous acceleration and deceleration without the limitations imposed by inertia or momentum. The combination of inertialess drives with gate technology allowed Imotech's fleets to execute complex maneuvers that left enemy commanders unable to predict or counter his movements. The tactical applications of inertialess drive technology revolutionized space combat by eliminating the predictable flight paths that conventional vessels were forced to follow. Necron ships could change direction instantaneously, accelerate to significant fractions of light speed without warning, or come to complete stops in the middle of high-speed engagements. This capability made traditional fleet tactics obsolete, as enemy gunners found themselves unable to calculate firing solutions against targets that could alter their vectors without regard for physical limitations. Imotech's fleet commanders exploited these advantages through combat doctrines that emphasized unpredictability and overwhelming firepower concentration. Necron squadrons would appear to be retreating from engagement zones only to reverse course instantly and deliver devastating broadsides against pursuing enemies. The inertialess drives also enabled complex formation flying that would be impossible for conventional vessels, with Necron fleets executing synchronized maneuvers that maximized their firing arcs while minimizing exposure to enemy weapons. The energy requirements for inertialess drive operation were substantial, requiring sophisticated power management systems that could channel the output of entire tomb worlds into propulsion systems during major fleet operations. The drives themselves incorporated living metal components that could adapt their configuration based on tactical requirements, optimizing their performance for different types of maneuvers or combat situations. The maintenance of these systems required specialized technical knowledge that had been preserved in the dynasty's data crypts throughout the Great Sleep. The deployment of advanced Necron war machines in Imotech's campaigns demonstrated his understanding that technological superiority alone was insufficient without proper tactical integration and strategic positioning. The fearsome doomsday arcs that formed the backbone of his heavy assault formations were not merely powerful weapons platforms, but carefully orchestrated elements of larger tactical schemes that maximized their devastating potential while protecting them from enemy countermeasures. Each arc's deployment was calculated to support multiple operational objectives simultaneously, providing fire support for advancing infantry while also serving as mobile command posts and repair facilities. The doomsday cannons mounted on these vehicles represented some of the most destructive weapons in the Necron arsenal, capable of reducing fortress walls to atomic dust or vaporizing entire enemy formations with single shots. The weapons operated by channeling focused streams of exotic particles through dimensional manipulation fields, creating energy beams that could penetrate virtually any known defensive system. The cannon's firing cycles required significant energy buildup periods, but Imotech's tactical doctrines incorporated these limitations into broader engagement strategies that used supporting units to protect the arcs during their charging sequences. The coordination of doomsday arc formations with other battlefield elements required precise timing and communication, as their massive energy discharges could interfere with nearby friendly units if not properly managed. Imotech's battle plans incorporated detailed firing sequences that maximized the arc's destructive potential while ensuring that supporting forces remained clear of their discharge zones. The psychological impact of these weapons often exceeded their physical destructiveness, with enemy forces breaking and fleeing after witnessing the complete annihilation of fortified positions that had been considered impregnable. The aerial superiority provided by Doomscythe squadrons added another crucial dimension to Imotech's tactical repertoire, with these sleek aircraft serving roles that ranged from reconnaissance and target designation to precision strikes against high-value enemy assets. The Scythe's twin-linked Tesla destructors could engage both aerial and ground targets with equal effectiveness, their electrical discharges cascading through enemy formations to disable vehicles and personnel across wide areas. The aircraft's quantum shielding provided protection against most enemy air defense systems, while their advanced sensor suites gathered intelligence that informed broader tactical decisions. The deployment of doom scythes in coordinated attack patterns created overlapping fields of fire that could devastate enemy formations, while maintaining the aircraft's mobility and survivability. Imotech's air commanders employed sophisticated flight profiles that maximized the scythes' advantages while minimizing their exposure to enemy countermeasures, using the aircraft's speed and maneuverability to strike at vulnerable targets before enemy air defenses could respond effectively. The psychological impact of these attacks was amplified by the scythes' distinctive appearance and the terrifying sound of their Tesla weapons discharging. The integration of Tesseract vaults into Imotech's battle plans represented the ultimate expression of Necron technological superiority, with these massive constructs serving as mobile fortresses that could dominate entire battlefields through their combination of devastating firepower and exotic defensive systems. Each vault contained imprisoned Katan shards, whose reality warping powers could be channeled through the vehicle's weapon systems, creating effects that defied conventional understanding of physics and warfare. The deployment of these assets required careful consideration of both tactical objectives and the risks associated with unleashing such dangerous energies. The Katan shards imprisoned within the Tesseract vaults retained fragments of their original god-like powers, enabling them to manipulate matter and energy on scales that conventional weapons could not match. The vault's control systems channeled these abilities through focusing arrays that could project the shards' powers across battlefield distances, allowing them to disintegrate enemy formations, manipulate gravitational fields, or even alter the flow of time within localized areas. The unpredictable nature of these effects made Tesseract vaults as dangerous to friendly forces as to enemies, requiring extensive coordination and safety protocols. Imotech's reputation for never losing a campaign stemmed not from luck or superior numbers, but from his systematic approach to warfare that eliminated variables and contingencies before they could affect operational outcomes. His pre-battle preparations involved exhaustive intelligence gathering and analysis that identified every possible enemy response and developed appropriate countermeasures. The Stormlord's planning staff maintained detailed databases on enemy commanders, unit capabilities, and tactical doctrines that informed strategic decisions and tactical deployments across multiple theaters of operation. The psychological warfare tactics employed by the Sautekh Dynasty under Imotech's leadership exploited the fundamental differences between immortal Necron warriors and the organic enemies they faced. Where living soldiers could be demoralized by casualties and setbacks, Necron forces fought with mechanical precision regardless of losses, their reanimation protocols ensuring that apparent defeats were merely temporary inconveniences. Imotekh leveraged this advantage by orchestrating campaigns that gradually wore down enemy morale through a combination of relentless pressure and unpredictable tactics that prevented opponents from developing effective countermeasures. The sight of Necron warriors rising from apparent death to continue fighting had devastating effects on enemy morale, particularly among forces that lacked experience fighting against reanimating opponents. Imotech's tactical doctrines deliberately exploited these psychological vulnerabilities by timing attacks to maximize the impact of warrior reanimation, allowing enemy forces to believe they had achieved tactical victories before revealing that their opponents remained fully combat effective. The cumulative effect of these revelations often caused complete psychological collapse among enemy formations. The coordination of terror tactics with conventional military operations required sophisticated understanding of enemy psychology and cultural factors that might influence their responses to different types of pressure. Imotech's intelligence services maintained detailed profiles of enemy species and their typical reactions to various forms of psychological warfare, allowing his commanders to tailor their approaches for maximum effectiveness against specific opponents. The mechanical nature of Necron forces made them ideal instruments for psychological warfare, as their emotionless efficiency and apparent invulnerability created an aura of inevitable doom that few organic enemies could withstand. The expansion of the Tau Empire into the Damocles Gulf region during the 41st millennium represented exactly the kind of territorial encroachment that Imotekh had anticipated during his strategic planning sessions following the Great Awakening. The young xenos species had established a growing network of colonies and military installations across star systems that ancient Necron star charts clearly marked as belonging to the Sautekh Dynasty's outer territorial boundaries. The Tau's rapid technological advancement and their philosophy of aggressive expansion through both diplomacy and conquest had brought them into direct conflict with several awakening tomb worlds, creating a situation that demanded immediate strategic attention from the Stormlord. The Imperial response to Tau expansion came in the form of a massive military undertaking designated as the Damocles Gulf Crusade, launched in the year 742 of the 41st millennium under the overall command of multiple Space Marine chapters supported by vast Imperial Guard formations and elements of the Imperial Navy. The scale of this operation demonstrated the Imperium's commitment to halting Tau expansion, while also revealing their complete ignorance of the ancient Necron claims to the region. Imperial strategic planning had focused entirely on the Tau threat, while failing to account for the tomb worlds that lay dormant throughout the contested systems, an oversight that would prove catastrophic for their long-term objectives. The Crusade's initial phases proceeded according to Imperial expectations, with Space Marine strike forces establishing beachheads on key Tau worlds, while Guard formations prepared for the grinding campaigns of attrition that characterized most Imperial military operations. The Ultramarines, White Scars, and Raven Guard committed significant forces to the operation, their different tactical doctrines creating a flexible command structure capable of adapting to the Tau's mobile warfare tactics. The Imperial Navy's battle fleets moved to establish orbital superiority over contested systems, their massive vessels providing fire support for ground operations while interdicting Tau's supply lines. Imotech's initial response to the Imperial invasion involved careful observation and analysis rather than immediate military intervention. His intelligence networks, consisting of Deathmark assassins and Lichguard reconnaissance units, monitored the developing conflict from hidden positions throughout the Damocles Gulf region. The data they gathered provided detailed assessments of both Imperial and Tau military capabilities, tactical doctrines, and command structures that would prove invaluable for the Stormlord's eventual intervention. The mechanical precision of Necron observation posts allowed them to track troop movements, supply convoys, and communication patterns without detection by either side's reconnaissance assets. The strategic opportunity presented by the Imperial-Tau conflict aligned perfectly with Imotech's preferred approach to warfare, which emphasized using enemy forces against each other while minimizing direct Necron casualties. The two younger races had committed substantial military resources to their mutual destruction, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited through carefully timed interventions. The Stormlord's analysis identified several key factors that would determine the conflict's outcome: the Imperial forces' dependence on extended supply lines, the Tau's reliance on technological superiority over numerical advantage, and both sides' complete ignorance of Necron presence in the region. The manipulation of Orkwa forces represented one of Imotech's most sophisticated strategic gambits, requiring precise coordination between multiple Necron assets and careful timing to achieve maximum effect. The Stormlord had identified several major Orc concentrations in systems adjacent to the Damocles Gulf massive greenskin populations that had been building toward Wa conditions for decades. These Orc forces represented potential weapons of enormous destructive power, but their chaotic nature made them extremely difficult to control or direct towards specific targets. The key to manipulating Orc behavior lay in understanding their fundamental psychology and the factors that triggered their transition from scattered tribal warfare to organized Wa migrations. Imotech's xenobiological analysis teams had studied Orc behavioral patterns throughout the galaxy, identifying the specific stimuli that could provoke aggressive responses and the methods by which Wa energy could be channeled toward desired objectives. The Necron approach to orc manipulation relied on subtle interventions that appeared to be natural developments rather than external manipulation, ensuring that the greenskins remained unaware of their role in larger strategic schemes. The initial phase of orc manipulation involved targeted strikes against specific orc settlements using Deathmark assassins and Night Scythe squadrons, eliminating key leaders and destroying strategic resources in ways that appeared to be the work of rival orc clans. These attacks were carefully calibrated to increase inter-clan tensions while avoiding the complete destruction that might scatter the orc populations before they could be properly directed. The Necron forces withdrew immediately after each strike, leaving behind evidence that implicated other orc factions in the attacks and ensuring that retaliatory violence would be directed against fellow greenskins rather than the true perpetrators. The escalation of orc violence through these provocations created the conditions necessary for Wa formation, as ambitious orc leaders began consolidating smaller clans under their authority to prosecute larger conflicts. The Necron intelligence networks monitored these developments closely, identifying the most promising Wa leaders and the factors that might influence their choice of targets. The manipulation process required extraordinary patience and precision, as premature intervention could disrupt the delicate psychological conditions necessary for Wa formation, while excessive delays might allow the orcs to dissipate their aggressive energy in internecine conflicts. The direction of orc aggression toward Imperial targets required more direct intervention, though still conducted in ways that maintained the illusion of natural orc behavior. Necron forces began conducting false flag operations against orc settlements using captured Imperial equipment and vehicles, creating the impression that human forces were expanding their operations beyond the Tau conflict to include preemptive strikes against potential greenskin threats. These attacks were timed to coincide with actual Imperial military movements in adjacent systems, providing circumstantial evidence that supported the deception while avoiding direct confrontation between Necron and Imperial forces. The psychological impact of these apparent Imperial attacks on orc populations proved even more effective than Imotekh had anticipated, as the greenskins' natural aggressive tendencies were amplified by their perception of unprovoked human aggression. The orc response followed predictable patterns, with Wa leaders declaring their intention to strike back against the puny ummies who had dared to attack orc territory. The consolidation of multiple orc clans under Wa banners created exactly the kind of massive, undirected force that Imotekh required for his strategic objectives. The timing of the Orc Wa launch was coordinated with Imperial tactical movements to maximize the disruption to Crusade operations, while minimizing the risk of orc forces accidentally engaging Necron assets. Imotekh's intelligence networks provided real-time updates on Imperial fleet positions and supply convoy schedules, allowing Necron coordinators to guide orc forces toward targets that would create maximum strategic impact. The greenskin fleets emerged from their staging areas just as Imperial reinforcement convoys were transiting through key systems, creating chaotic multi-way engagements that served Necron interests perfectly. The Imperial response to the orc intervention revealed fundamental weaknesses in their strategic planning and command structure that Imotekh had identified during his initial analysis phase. The Crusade's leadership was forced to divide their attention between the original Tau objectives and the new orc threat, creating coordination problems that reduced the effectiveness of both operational theaters. The rigid Imperial command hierarchy struggled to adapt to the rapidly changing tactical situation, with different Space Marine chapters pursuing conflicting objectives, while Guard formations found themselves committed to defensive operations that prevented them from supporting the primary offensive. The Tau Empire's reaction to the Orc Wa demonstrated their own strategic limitations, as their carefully planned defensive strategies proved inadequate against the chaotic nature of greenskin warfare. The Tau's reliance on technological superiority and coordinated tactics worked well against Imperial forces, but failed catastrophically when applied to orc opponents who ignored conventional tactical wisdom and attacked with overwhelming numbers regardless of casualties. The result was a three-way conflict that consumed enormous resources from all participants while advancing none of their strategic objectives. The systematic elimination of Imperial strongholds began during the height of the three-way conflict, when Imperial attention was focused on immediate tactical concerns rather than strategic security. Imotech's assault forces emerged from previously undetected tomb complexes throughout the Damocles Gulf region, their coordinated attacks targeting key Imperial installations with precision that demonstrated months of careful planning and reconnaissance. The Necron forces struck simultaneously across multiple star systems, overwhelming isolated Imperial garrisons before they could request assistance or coordinate defensive responses. The selection of targets for these initial strikes reflected Imotech's understanding of Imperial military logistics and the critical nodes that supported their extended operations. Rather than attacking heavily defended frontline positions, the Necron forces concentrated on supply depots, communication hubs, and repair facilities that were essential for maintaining the Crusade's operational tempo. The destruction of these installations created cascading effects throughout the Imperial command structure, as frontline units found themselves cut off from resupply, while commanders lost the ability to coordinate operations across multiple systems. The Necron assault techniques employed during these operations demonstrated the technological superiority that made their forces so effective against younger races. Monolith squadrons materialized directly within Imperial fortress complexes through dimensional manipulation, their Gauss flux arcs systematically disintegrating defensive positions, while their particle whips eliminated specific targets with surgical precision. The psychological impact of these sudden appearances was often as devastating as their physical effects, with Imperial defenders breaking and fleeing rather than attempting to fight opponents who could bypass their fortifications entirely. The coordination of ground assaults with orbital bombardment created synergistic effects that maximized the destruction of Imperial installations while minimizing Necron casualties. Cairn-class tomb ships emerged from the void to deliver devastating broadsides against orbital defense platforms, their living metal hulls absorbing return fire, while their exotic weapon systems reduced enemy vessels to constituent atoms. The combination of superior firepower and advanced defensive systems made Necron fleets nearly invulnerable to Imperial countermeasures, allowing them to maintain orbital superiority while supporting ground operations. The use of stellar manipulation technology represented the most sophisticated aspect of Imotech's assault strategy, demonstrating capabilities that the younger races could barely comprehend. Necron installations throughout the Damocles Gulf region began coordinating their activities to influence stellar phenomena in ways that supported military operations while creating additional psychological pressure on enemy forces. The manipulation of solar flares and stellar radiation patterns disrupted Imperial communication systems while creating navigational hazards that interfered with fleet movements. The world engine designated Borsis participated in several of these stellar manipulation operations, its massive bulk serving as a mobile platform for exotic energy projection systems that could influence stellar behavior across interstellar distances. The ancient construct's presence in the Damocles Gulf region had remained undetected throughout the Imperial Tau conflict, its dormant systems awakening only when Imotech's strategic requirements demanded their activation. The world engine's capabilities included the ability to trigger solar storms, manipulate gravitational fields, and even influence the behavior of stellar coronas in ways that created tactical advantages for Necron forces. The psychological warfare aspects of stellar manipulation proved as valuable as their tactical applications, as Imperial forces found themselves facing opponents who could apparently control the very stars themselves. The sight of solar flares erupting in impossible patterns or gravitational anomalies appearing without warning created an atmosphere of supernatural dread that undermined Imperial morale and combat effectiveness. The younger race's limited understanding of advanced physics made them particularly susceptible to these demonstrations of Necron technological supremacy. The Imperial withdrawal from the Damocles Gulf region began as a series of tactical retreats from untenable positions, but quickly escalated into a full strategic withdrawal as the scope of the Necron threat became apparent. The Crusades' leadership recognized that their forces were facing opponents whose technological capabilities far exceeded anything in the Imperial arsenal, making continued offensive operations impossible without massive reinforcements that were unavailable given the Imperium's other commitments. The decision to withdraw represented a complete failure of the Crusades' original objectives, though it probably prevented the complete destruction of the Imperial forces involved. The coordination of the Imperial withdrawal revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of their military organization, as Space Marine forces conducted effective rearguard actions, while guard formations struggled to maintain cohesion during the retreat. The different tactical doctrines of the various Space Marine chapters created coordination problems during the withdrawal, with some units attempting to maintain offensive operations, while others focused on extraction and evacuation. The result was a chaotic retreat that left substantial Imperial assets behind while failing to achieve any of the strategic objectives that had justified the Crusades' launch. The establishment of Sautekh dominance in the Damocles Gulf region proceeded according to protocols that Imotekh had developed during his analysis of galactic power structures and territorial control mechanisms. The Necron forces did not attempt to occupy every world in the region, but instead focused on controlling key strategic points that would allow them to monitor and interdict future incursions by younger races. The tomb worlds that had remained dormant throughout the conflict were systematically reactivated and integrated into the dynasty's defensive network, creating overlapping fields of fire and mutual support that would make future invasions extremely costly. The treatment of surviving Tau and Imperial populations in the region reflected Imotekh's strategic priorities rather than any particular animosity toward the younger races. Populations that posed no immediate threat to Necron operations were generally ignored, while those that occupied strategically important locations were systematically eliminated or relocated. The Necron approach to territorial control emphasized strategic value over total population control, allowing them to maintain dominance with relatively modest force commitments while keeping the majority of their military assets available for operations in other regions. The long-term implications of Sautekh control over the Damocles Gulf region extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation to encompass broader questions of galactic power balance and territorial expansion by the younger races. The demonstration of Necron technological superiority and strategic competence served as a warning to other expanding civilizations that their territorial ambitions might encounter opposition from forces they could neither understand nor effectively counter. The establishment of Necron dominance in the region created a buffer zone that protected the dynasty's core territories while providing advance warning of future threats from the galactic rim. The establishment of Sautekh dominance across the Damocles Gulf created ripple effects throughout the broader Necron hierarchy that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The success of Imotekh's campaigns had demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated dynastic action, but it had also highlighted the complex web of relationships and rivalries that existed between different Necron factions. The awakening process had not restored the unified command structure that had existed during the War in Heaven, leaving individual dynasties to pursue their own agendas while navigating the delicate balance between cooperation and competition that characterized interdynastic politics. The relationship between the Sautekh Dynasty and Nemesser Zondrek of the Mefrit Dynasty exemplified these complexities, representing one of the most intriguing diplomatic challenges that Imotekh faced during his post-awakening campaigns. Zondrek's reputation as a brilliant military strategist was well established throughout the Necron hierarchy, his tactical innovations during the War in Heaven having earned him recognition from peers who rarely acknowledged the achievements of rival dynasties. However, the biotransference process had affected the ancient Nemeser in ways that created both opportunities and complications for potential cooperation between their forces. The damage to Zondrek's memory engrams had left him convinced that the Great Sleep had never occurred, and that the current conflicts represented a continuation of the ancient wars against the Old Ones and their client races. This delusion manifested in his treatment of younger races, as if they were the same enemies the Necrons had fought millions of years earlier, with Space Marines being identified as particularly advanced warrior constructs created by the Old Ones to counter Necron military superiority. While this misperception created tactical complications, it also provided certain strategic advantages that Imotekh had learned to exploit through careful diplomatic maneuvering. Vargard Oberon's unwavering loyalty to his master created an additional layer of complexity in any negotiations between the dynasties, as the bodyguard's protective instincts often conflicted with broader strategic considerations. Oberon's awareness of Zondrek's condition made him extremely cautious about any external influences that might disrupt his master's mental equilibrium, leading to situations where potentially beneficial cooperation was prevented by the Vargard's protective interventions. The mechanical precision of Oberon's dedication to his duties created a predictable but inflexible element in interdynastic relations that required careful navigation. The occasional military cooperation between Sautekh and Mefrit forces demonstrated the potential benefits of coordinated Necron action, while also highlighting the practical difficulties involved in managing such relationships. Zondrek's tactical brilliance remained unimpaired despite his memory issues, making his forces valuable allies when their objectives aligned with Sautekh's strategic goals. The coordination of joint operations required careful planning to ensure that Zondrek's misconceptions about enemy identity did not interfere with tactical execution, while also maintaining the diplomatic fiction that supported his continued cooperation. The Battle of Sanctuary 101 provided a particularly clear example of both the benefits and challenges of Sautekh-Mefrit cooperation, as forces from both dynasties converged on an Imperial fortress world that threatened tomb installations in adjacent systems. Zondrek's approach to the campaign treated the Imperial defenders as Old One constructs, leading him to employ tactics that were actually well-suited to countering Space Marine combat doctrines, despite being based on entirely incorrect assumptions about enemy capabilities. The coordination between Imotekh's systematic siege operations and Zondrek's more fluid tactical approaches created synergistic effects that overwhelmed Imperial defenses more effectively than either force could have achieved independently. The management of these joint operations required sophisticated diplomatic protocols that acknowledged Zondrek's seniority and tactical expertise, while ensuring that overall strategic coordination remained under Sautekh control. Imotekh's staff developed communication procedures that presented strategic directives in terms that aligned with Zondrek's worldview, describing Imperial forces using terminology from the War in Heaven era, while providing tactical intelligence in formats that the Mefrit commander could readily understand and utilize. These procedures allowed for effective coordination without challenging the mental constructs that maintained Zondrek's operational effectiveness. The territorial disputes between different Necron dynasties represented a more fundamental challenge to galactic stability, as awakening tomb worlds discovered that millions of years of continental drift and stellar evolution had altered the boundaries that had been established before the Great Sleep. The precise territorial divisions that had been negotiated during the pre-sleep period were often impossible to implement in the changed galactic environment, leading to conflicting claims over strategically important systems and resources. These disputes were complicated by the absence of the Silent King's overriding authority, leaving individual dynasties to resolve territorial conflicts through negotiation or force. The Sautekh Dynasty's expansion into regions that had previously been controlled by other factions created numerous opportunities for territorial disputes, particularly with dynasties whose awakening schedules had been delayed by technical problems or external interference. The Nihilakh Dynasty's claims to several systems in the galactic core region conflicted directly with Sautekh territorial assertions, creating a diplomatic crisis that threatened to escalate into open warfare between the two factions. The resolution of these disputes required careful analysis of ancient territorial agreements and the development of new protocols that could accommodate the changed galactic situation. The awakening priorities of different dynasties created additional sources of interfactional tension, as some Necron leaders prioritized immediate territorial expansion, while others focused on internal consolidation and technological restoration. The Sautekh Dynasty's aggressive expansion strategy conflicted with the more cautious approaches favored by dynasties that had suffered significant losses during the Great Sleep or that faced immediate threats from younger races. These philosophical differences often translated into practical disagreements about resource allocation, military cooperation, and the appropriate response to external threats. The Navak dynasty's emphasis on direct military confrontation with younger races created particular friction with Imotekh's more sophisticated strategic approaches, as their aggressive tactics often interfered with carefully planned Sautekh operations. The Navak preference for overwhelming force and immediate assault conflicted with the Stormlord's methods of psychological warfare and strategic manipulation, leading to situations where Navak attacks disrupted Sautekh plans that had been years in development. The coordination of operations between dynasties with such different tactical philosophies required constant diplomatic attention and frequent tactical adjustments. The threat posed by destroyer cults represented a fundamentally different challenge that transcended traditional dynastic boundaries and threatened the stability of Necron civilization as a whole. These nihilistic factions had emerged from Necrons whose personalities had been corrupted by the biotransference process, transforming them into beings whose only purpose was the complete annihilation of all life in the galaxy. The destroyer philosophy directly contradicted Imotekh's empire-building objectives, as their ultimate goal was the elimination of all potential subjects rather than their conquest and control. The spread of destroyer ideology among awakening Necron populations created security concerns that required immediate attention from dynastic leadership, as infected individuals could potentially corrupt entire tomb worlds if their influence was not contained. The mechanical nature of Necron consciousness made them particularly susceptible to certain forms of ideological contamination, as logical arguments for universal destruction could propagate through communication networks with viral efficiency. The identification and containment of destroyer influence required sophisticated monitoring systems and rapid response protocols that could isolate infected individuals before their corruption spread. The military capabilities of destroyer cults made them dangerous opponents even for well-equipped Necron forces, as their single-minded focus on annihilation had led them to develop specialized weapons and tactics designed specifically for maximum destructive effect. Destroyer units modified their bodies with additional weapon systems and targeting arrays, transforming themselves into living instruments of death that could eliminate vast numbers of enemies with terrifying efficiency. Their complete disregard for self-preservation made them unpredictable opponents whose tactical decisions were based purely on maximizing casualties rather than achieving strategic objectives. The philosophical conflict between destroyer ideology and traditional Necron civilization created challenges that extended beyond immediate military concerns to encompass fundamental questions about the nature and purpose of their species. The destroyer's argument that the biotransference had stripped away everything that made existence meaningful resonated with some Necrons who struggled with their mechanical existence, creating potential recruitment pools for the cults among populations that might otherwise have remained loyal to their dynasties. The counter-arguments required sophisticated philosophical frameworks that could provide alternative meanings for Necron existence without acknowledging the validity of destroyer concerns. The containment of destroyer influence required cooperation between different dynasties, as the threat transcended traditional territorial boundaries and could potentially affect any Necron population regardless of their factional allegiance. Imotech's diplomatic initiatives included proposals for joint anti-destroyer operations and intelligence sharing agreements that would allow different dynasties to coordinate their responses to cult activities. These proposals faced resistance from dynasties that preferred to handle internal security matters independently, creating situations where destroyer influence could spread unchecked in regions where local authorities were unwilling to accept external assistance. The internal challenges within the Sautekh Dynasty itself created additional complications for Imotech's strategic planning, as ambitious subordinates sought to advance their own positions within the hierarchy through various forms of political maneuvering and tactical innovation. The immortal nature of Necron existence meant that traditional succession mechanisms were largely irrelevant, creating a political environment where advancement required either the voluntary abdication of superiors or their elimination through direct challenge. The mechanical precision of Necron memory systems made it impossible to simply forget past grievances or political conflicts, ensuring that internal disputes could persist for millennia without resolution. Lord Cutlack the World Killer represented one of the most significant internal challenges to Imotech's authority, his aggressive expansion campaigns having earned him considerable recognition within the dynasty, while also creating diplomatic complications with neighboring factions. Cutlack's preference for direct assault tactics and overwhelming force aligned with traditional Necron military doctrine, but conflicted with the Stormlord's more sophisticated approaches to warfare and territorial expansion. The success of Cutlack's campaigns created a power base within the dynasty that could potentially challenge Imotech's strategic authority if not carefully managed. The political maneuvering required to maintain control over ambitious subordinates while still utilizing their capabilities effectively required constant attention to the balance of power within the dynasty's hierarchy. Imotech's approach to managing internal challenges involved providing ambitious lords with opportunities to distinguish themselves in ways that supported overall dynastic objectives, while preventing them from accumulating enough independent power to pose serious threats to his authority. This balancing act required sophisticated understanding of individual personalities and motivations, as well as careful management of resource allocation and territorial assignments. The competition between different noble houses within the Sautekh Dynasty created additional layers of complexity in internal politics, as ancient rivalries and territorial disputes continued to influence contemporary decision-making processes. The biotransference had preserved not only individual personalities, but also the complex web of relationships and obligations that had characterized pre-sleep Necron society, creating a political environment where historical grievances could influence strategic decisions. The resolution of these internal conflicts required diplomatic skills that were often more challenging than managing relationships with external enemies. The technological capabilities available to ambitious Necron lords made internal security a particularly complex challenge, as individuals with access to advanced weapons and communication systems could potentially coordinate rebellion activities across multiple tomb worlds simultaneously. The quantum entanglement networks that enabled efficient command and control also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by internal enemies seeking to disrupt dynastic operations or gather intelligence for their own purposes. The security protocols required to prevent such activities had to balance operational efficiency with protection against internal threats. The awakening process itself created opportunities for ambitious lords to challenge established hierarchies, as the restoration of tomb worlds and military formations required new command assignments and territorial allocations that could be influenced by political maneuvering. The lords who managed to secure control over strategically important installations or particularly powerful military formations gained leverage that could be used to advance their positions within the dynasty's hierarchy. The management of these assignments required careful consideration of both military effectiveness and political stability. The awakening sensors throughout the Sautekh Dynasty's monitoring networks detected the massive gravitational disturbances long before the greenskin fleet materialized from the warp. Skullcrack represented one of the largest orc migrations to threaten the galactic core in millennia, its chaotic energy signatures indicating a force that numbered in the hundreds of millions of warriors spread across thousands of ramshackle vessels. The Wa's trajectory would carry it directly through systems containing no fewer than 17 Sautekh tomb worlds, including several major installations that housed critical manufacturing facilities and strategic weapon stockpiles. Warboss Skullcrack himself embodied everything that made orc society both terrifying and strategically predictable. Standing nearly 4 meters tall even when hunched over, his massive frame was encased in a patchwork of scavenged armor plates welded together with crude but effective techniques. His signature weapon, a massive power claw designated Gutrapper, incorporated salvaged Imperial power field generators with orc mechanical ingenuity, creating a weapon capable of tearing through tank armor as easily as flesh. The Warboss's personal warship, a converted space hulk called Smashy Bashy, served as both flagship and mobile fortress for the Wa, its hull bristling with weapons looted from a dozen different civilizations. The orc fleet's composition revealed the typical mixture of ingenuity and chaos that characterized greenskin military organization. Ramshackle kill cruisers formed the backbone of the fleet, their hulls constructed from salvaged Imperial vessels, Eldar craftworld debris, and even fragments of ancient Necron tomb ships that had been stripped for materials. These vessels defied conventional understanding of spacecraft design, their asymmetrical configurations and jury-rigged systems somehow managing to function despite violating every principle of proper engineering. The smaller vessels included brute ram ships designed for boarding actions, onslaught attack ships optimized for close-range combat, and countless assault boats that served as transports for the Wa's ground forces. Imotech's initial assessment of the orc threat identified several key factors that would determine the most effective response strategy. The Wa's size made direct confrontation potentially costly, as even Necron technological superiority could be overwhelmed by sufficient numbers of determined opponents. The chaotic nature of orc organization created both vulnerabilities and unpredictable elements that complicated strategic planning, as conventional tactical analysis often failed to account for the random variables introduced by greenskin psychology and their bizarre technology. Most importantly, the Wa's momentum and internal dynamics suggested that it could not be simply deflected or discouraged, but would require either complete destruction or careful manipulation to prevent catastrophic damage to Sautekh holdings. The Stormlord's response began with a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation that deployed Deathmark assassins and Lichguard reconnaissance units throughout the Wa's projected path. These infiltration teams established hidden observation posts on asteroids and derelict spacecraft, their advanced sensor systems monitoring orc communications and fleet movements while remaining undetected by the Greenskin's crew detection equipment. The intelligence gathered revealed the complex tribal structure within the Wa, identifying key leaders, resource distribution networks, and the factional tensions that existed beneath the surface unity imposed by Skullcrack's dominance. The orc tribal hierarchy within the Wa followed predictable patterns that Imotech's xenobiological analysis teams had studied extensively during previous encounters with greenskin forces. Skullcrack's authority rested on his ability to maintain the loyalty of subordinate knobs and big mechs through a combination of personal charisma, demonstrated combat prowess, and the distribution of loot and resources captured during the Wa's expansion. The tribal structure included several major clans, each with their own specialized roles and internal hierarchies that created natural fault lines for potential exploitation. The Bad Moons clan controlled much of the Wa's economic infrastructure, their obsession with wealth and status symbols making them the primary traders and equipment suppliers for the entire force. Their yellow painted vehicles and elaborate decorations marked them as the most prosperous members of the Wa, but their focus on accumulating resources also made them potential targets for manipulation through economic warfare. The clan's leadership included several powerful big mechs whose technical expertise was crucial for maintaining the Waa's ramshackle fleet and equipment. The Goths provided the Waa's primary assault troops, their black and white checkered banners marking them as the most aggressive and combat-focused clan within Skullcrack's forces. These orcs lived for close combat and direct confrontation, their culture emphasizing personal combat prowess and the accumulation of battle trophies. The Goths' predictable aggression made them useful tools for manipulation, as their responses to provocation followed established patterns that could be anticipated and exploited by sophisticated opponents. The Evil Sunts served as the Waa's mobile strike force, their red-painted vehicles and obsession with speed making them ideal for rapid deployment and hit-and-run tactics. This clan's culture revolved around vehicular combat and racing, creating a competitive environment that could potentially be manipulated through challenges and contests. The Evil Sunts possessed some of the most advanced vehicles in the Waa, their speed freaks having modified their machines with looted technology from multiple sources. The manipulation strategy that Imotekh developed exploited the fundamental characteristics of orc psychology while avoiding direct confrontation that might unite the various clans against a common enemy. The plan involved a series of carefully orchestrated incidents designed to increase tensions between different tribal factions, while simultaneously disrupting the resource distribution networks that maintained Waa cohesion. The key to success lay in making these interventions appear to be the result of internal conflicts rather than external manipulation, ensuring that orc aggression would be directed inward rather than toward Necron forces. The first phase of the manipulation campaign targeted the supply convoys that transported resources between different parts of the orc fleet. Deathmark assassins using captured orc weapons conducted precision strikes against specific convoy escorts, eliminating key personnel while leaving evidence that implicated rival clans in the attacks. The assassins' advanced marksmanship capabilities allowed them to eliminate targets from extreme ranges using crude orc weaponry, creating the impression that the attacks were conducted by particularly skilled orc snipers rather than external forces. The timing of these attacks was coordinated with natural fluctuations in the Waa's internal politics, ensuring that existing tensions between clans would amplify the impact of the apparent betrayals. The Bad Moon's convoys were targeted when they were transporting particularly valuable cargo, creating maximum economic impact while providing clear motives for the apparent attacks. The evidence planted at attack sites included personal items and weapon components that could be traced to specific rival clans, creating a web of apparent guilt that would be difficult for orc investigators to unravel. The escalation of inter-clan violence followed predictable patterns as the various factions began retaliating against their perceived enemies. The Goths responded to apparent attacks on their supply lines by launching direct assaults against suspected Bad Moon's positions, their aggressive nature making them ideal catalysts for broader conflicts. The Evil Sunts became involved when their racing competitions were disrupted by what appeared to be sabotage from rival clans, leading to high-speed vehicle battles that consumed resources and personnel that would otherwise have been available for external operations. The psychological warfare aspects of the manipulation campaign exploited the orcs' fundamental need for constant conflict and competition. Necron agents using holographic projectors and audio transmission systems created false evidence of clan leaders making disparaging comments about their rivals, broadcasting these fabricated insults through orc communication networks at carefully chosen moments. The mechanical precision of Necron technology allowed for perfect mimicry of orc voices and speech patterns, making the false communications virtually indistinguishable from genuine transmissions. The disruption of the Waa's technological infrastructure required more direct intervention, as the big mechs responsible for maintaining the fleet's equipment possessed enough technical knowledge to potentially detect external sabotage. The solution involved the deployment of Imotekh scarabs programmed to mimic the behavior of Orc Gretchen, the small greenskin subspecies that performed most manual labor within orc society. These robotic agents infiltrated the WA's maintenance areas and began systematically introducing subtle flaws into critical systems, creating equipment failures that would appear to be the result of poor maintenance or sabotage by rival clans. The Scarabs' programming allowed them to avoid detection by orc security systems while performing their sabotage missions with surgical precision. The mechanical creatures targeted specific components whose failure would create maximum disruption while leaving evidence that pointed toward internal sabotage rather than external attack. The cumulative effect of these small failures created a cascade of equipment problems that forced the orcs to divert increasing amounts of resources toward maintenance and repair operations. The Battle of Mandragora began when Skullcrack's attempts to restore unity within his Wa led him to declare a massive assault against the most prominent target in the region. The warboss's tactical analysis, such as it was, identified the Sautekh Dynasty's crown world as the source of the mysterious problems plaguing his forces, though his reasoning was based more on intuition than actual intelligence. The decision to attack Mandragora represented exactly the kind of predictable response that Imotekh had anticipated, allowing him to prepare comprehensive defensive measures while maintaining the illusion that the orcs had discovered his involvement through their own investigation. The orc assault fleet that approached Mandragora represented the full military might of Wa Skullcrack, with over 3,000 vessels of various sizes converging on the Tomb World's defensive perimeter. The sheer scale of the attacking force would have overwhelmed most planetary defense systems, but Mandragora's fortifications had been designed to withstand assaults by enemies possessing far more advanced technology than the Greenskins could deploy. The planet's orbital defense platforms emerged from concealment as the Orc fleet approached, their Tesla destructors and Gauss cannons creating overlapping fields of fire that could engage multiple targets simultaneously. The initial orbital engagement demonstrated the fundamental differences between Necron and Orc approaches to warfare. The Greenskin fleet attacked in a chaotic swarm formation that relied on overwhelming numbers rather than tactical coordination, their vessels charging directly toward the planet's surface while firing every weapon they possessed. The Necron defensive response was methodical and precise, with each weapon system targeting specific enemy vessels based on threat assessment algorithms that prioritize the most dangerous opponents while maximizing overall destructive efficiency. The Orc fleet's ramshackle construction proved both a weakness and a strength during the orbital battle. Many vessels suffered catastrophic failures when their jury-rigged systems were damaged by Necron weapons, but others demonstrated remarkable resilience as their redundant systems and crude repair capabilities allowed them to continue fighting despite suffering damage that would have disabled more sophisticated ships. The chaotic nature of Orc engineering meant that identical-looking vessels could have completely different capabilities and vulnerabilities, making it difficult for Necron targeting systems to predict the effects of their attacks. The deployment of the Sautekh Dynasty's full military might transform Mandragora's surface into a fortress bristling with defensive installations and mobile weapon platforms. Monolith squadrons materialized at key defensive positions, their dimensional manipulation capabilities allowing them to appear exactly where they were needed most, while their weapon systems provided overlapping fields of fire that could engage both aerial and ground targets. The ancient pyramid's particle whips swept across the battlefield with mechanical precision, eliminating Orc vehicles and personnel with focused energy beams that left no trace of their targets except scattered atoms. The Doomsday arcs that formed the backbone of the planet's heavy weapons support took positions on elevated terrain features that maximized their firing arcs while providing natural protection against return fire. These massive vehicles, Doomsday cannons, could engage targets across continental distances, their focused particle beams capable of destroying entire Orc formations with single shots. The coordination between different arc formations created overlapping kill zones that prevented the Orcs from concentrating their forces effectively, while ensuring that no area of the battlefield remained uncovered by heavy weapons support. The aerial superiority provided by Doom's Scythe squadrons added another layer to Mandragora's defensive capabilities, with these sleek aircraft conducting precision strikes against high-value targets while providing reconnaissance information that informed ground-based defensive operations. The Scythe's twin-linked Tesla destructors proved particularly effective against Orc aircraft, their electrical discharges cascading through the crude metal construction of greenskin flying machines to disable multiple systems simultaneously. The psychological impact of these attacks was amplified by the Scythe's distinctive appearance and the terrifying sound of their weapons discharging. The ground combat that followed the Orc landings demonstrated the fundamental superiority of Necron military technology and tactical doctrine over greenskin mob tactics. Necron warrior phalanxes advanced across the battlefield with mechanical precision, their Gauss flayers systematically eliminating Orc infantry, while their reanimation protocols ensured that apparent casualties returned to combat within minutes. The sight of Necron warriors rising from apparent death to continue fighting had devastating effects on Orc morale, though the Greenskins' natural aggression prevented complete collapse of their battle lines. The immortal squads that provided heavy weapons support for the warrior formations demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated firepower against massed enemy formations. Their Gauss blasters and Tesla carbines created overlapping fields of fire that could engage multiple targets simultaneously, while their enhanced durability allowed them to hold key positions against overwhelming enemy numbers. The Immortals' tactical flexibility allowed them to adapt their firing patterns based on changing battlefield conditions, maximizing their effectiveness against different types of Orc units. The specialized units that supported the main defensive formations added crucial capabilities that exploited specific Orc weaknesses. Deathmark squads used their dimensional oubliettes to appear behind enemy lines, their synaptic disintegrator rifles eliminating Orc leaders and specialists whose loss disrupted greenskin coordination and morale. The Lichguard formations that protected key installations demonstrated their close combat capabilities against Orc assault troops, their warscythes and hyperphase swords cutting through greenskin armor and flesh with equal efficiency. The aftermath of the Battle of Mandragora provided Imotekh with unprecedented opportunities to study Orc technology and tactical methods at close range. The battlefield was littered with thousands of destroyed Orc vehicles and weapons, their crude but effective construction techniques offering insights into greenskin engineering principles and manufacturing capabilities. The Stormlord's technical analysis teams began systematic examination of captured equipment, identifying design elements that could be adapted for Necron use, while also developing countermeasures for future encounters with similar technology. The study of Orc psychological warfare techniques revealed sophisticated understanding of morale and intimidation tactics that had been developed through millions of years of constant warfare. The Greenskins' use of noise, visual displays, and psychological pressure demonstrated principles that could be adapted for use against other enemy species, particularly those whose morale could be affected by demonstrations of overwhelming force. The mechanical nature of Necron forces made them ideal platforms for psychological warfare, as their emotionless efficiency created an aura of inevitable doom that few organic enemies could withstand. The integration of captured Orc technology into Necron's strategic capabilities required careful analysis of compatibility issues and potential applications. The crude but effective nature of greenskin engineering offered solutions to problems that Necron designers had approached through more sophisticated methods, sometimes providing simpler alternatives that consumed fewer resources while achieving similar results. The modular nature of Orc construction techniques also provided insights into rapid deployment and field modification capabilities that could enhance Necron operational flexibility. The tactical lessons learned from the Orc assault influenced Imotekh's approach to future defensive operations and strategic planning. The Greenskins' reliance on overwhelming numbers and chaotic tactics had tested Necron defensive systems in ways that more sophisticated enemies could not, revealing both strengths and potential vulnerabilities in Sautekh military doctrine. The experience provided valuable data about the effectiveness of different weapon systems against massed infantry attacks, while also demonstrating the importance of maintaining tactical flexibility when facing unpredictable opponents. The broader strategic implications of the successful defense against Skullcrack extended throughout the galactic core region, as other orc populations observed the complete destruction of such a massive force by previously unknown opponents. The demonstration of Necron military capabilities served as a deterrent to other potential threats, while also establishing the Sautekh Dynasty's reputation as a major power in the region. The psychological impact of the victory resonated throughout Greenskin society, creating legends and myths that would influence orc behavior for generations to come. The expansion of Sautekh operations beyond the Damocles Gulf brought Imotekh's forces into direct contact with Imperial military formations that had been conducting routine patrol operations throughout the galactic core sectors. These initial encounters occurred during the 998th year of the 41st millennium, as Imperial Navy vessels conducting standard reconnaissance sweeps began detecting anomalous energy signatures from systems that their star charts marked as uninhabited or strategically insignificant. The Imperial response followed predictable patterns, with small exploration fleets dispatched to investigate these disturbances before larger military formations could be committed to what appeared to be minor anomalies. The first documented contact between Sautekh forces and the Astra Militarum occurred in the Galar system, where the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment had established a forward observation post on the system's primary asteroid belt. The Cadians represented some of the Imperium's most experienced and disciplined troops, their purple uniforms and distinctive equipment marking them as veterans of countless campaigns against the enemies of mankind. Their commander, Colonel Mordian Vex, had positioned his forces according to standard Imperial doctrine, establishing overlapping fields of fire and defensive positions that could withstand assault by conventional enemy forces. The Necron approach to this first contact scenario reflected Imotekh's systematic methodology for gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities while minimizing unnecessary casualties among his own forces. Rather than launching an immediate assault, Sautekh reconnaissance units spent several weeks observing Imperial operations from concealed positions throughout the asteroid field. Deathmark assassins established hidden observation posts on various asteroids, their advanced sensor systems monitoring Imperial communication patterns, supply schedules, and tactical procedures while remaining completely undetected by the Guard Regiment's security sweeps. The intelligence gathered during this observation period provided Imotekh with detailed assessments of Imperial Guard organizational structure, equipment capabilities, and tactical doctrine. The Cadians demonstrated remarkable discipline and professionalism in their daily operations, maintaining strict security protocols and equipment maintenance schedules that spoke to their extensive combat experience. Their Laws weapons showed signs of careful maintenance and modification, while their heavy weapons teams operated with the precision that came from years of battlefield experience against various enemy forces. The Imperial Guard's reliance on established communication procedures created vulnerabilities that Necron intelligence specialists were able to exploit through careful monitoring of their transmission schedules and encryption patterns. The Guard's use of standard Imperial codes and communication protocols meant that their operational security was based on assumptions about enemy technical capabilities that were completely inadequate when applied to Necron technology. The mechanical precision of Necron analysis systems allowed them to decode Imperial transmissions in real time, providing complete intelligence about Guard operations and intentions. The capture of Imperial prisoners began with carefully orchestrated ambushes designed to isolate small groups of soldiers without alerting the main Imperial force to the presence of hostile activity. Deathmark assassins used their dimensional oubliettes to appear behind Imperial patrol units, their synaptic disintegrator rifles set to minimum power settings that could incapacitate targets without causing permanent damage. The precision of these weapons allowed the Necrons to disable specific individuals while leaving their companions unharmed, creating confusion about what had actually occurred during the encounters. The interrogation facilities established in temporary Necron installations throughout the asteroid field incorporated advanced analysis systems that could extract information from captured subjects through a combination of technological scanning and psychological manipulation techniques. The mechanical nature of Necron interrogation methods proved particularly effective against Imperial Guard personnel, whose training had prepared them for conventional torture techniques, but not for the systematic analysis of their memories and thought patterns by alien technology. Colonel Vex himself became a subject of particular interest when his command chimera was disabled during what appeared to be a routine equipment malfunction, but was actually the result of Imotekh Scarab infiltration of the vehicle's systems. The Colonel's capture provided Imotekh with access to high-level Imperial intelligence about Guard organizational structure, supply networks, and strategic objectives in the region. The interrogation revealed the extent of Imperial territorial claims throughout the galactic core, as well as their complete ignorance of Necron presence in systems they considered to be under their control. The information extracted from Imperial prisoners painted a comprehensive picture of the Imperium's current political and military situation, revealing an empire stretched to its breaking point by constant warfare on multiple fronts. The Guard regiments operating in the region were part of larger strategic deployments designed to counter threats from Chaos incursions, Orc invasions, and Tyranid hive fleets, leaving them with insufficient resources to properly investigate or respond to new threats. The Imperial command structure's focus on immediate tactical concerns meant that reports of anomalous activity were often dismissed or assigned low priority unless they represented clear and present dangers. The systematic analysis of Imperial equipment captured during these operations provided Necron technical specialists with detailed understanding of current human military technology and manufacturing capabilities. The Laws weapons used by Guard infantry represented a mature technology that balanced effectiveness with ease of production and maintenance, though their energy output remained primitive compared to Necron equivalents. The Imperial vehicles demonstrated sophisticated engineering within the constraints of their technological base, incorporating armor and weapon systems that could pose threats to individual Necron units under favorable circumstances. The Space Marine forces that Imotekh's intelligence networks identified operating in adjacent sectors represented a significantly more dangerous threat than the conventional Imperial Guard formations. The Adeptus Astartes combined superior individual capabilities with advanced equipment and tactical flexibility that made them formidable opponents even for technologically superior forces. The Ultramarines chapter had deployed significant forces to the region as part of their ongoing efforts to maintain Imperial control over strategically important systems, their blue armored warriors serving as rapid response forces for situations that exceeded the capabilities of conventional Guard formations. The first engagement between Sautekh forces and Ultramarines occurred during the Imperial investigation of the Galar system incident, as a strike force led by Captain Titus of the 2nd Company arrived to determine what had happened to the missing Cadian regiment. The Ultramarines approached the situation with their characteristic methodical precision, conducting detailed reconnaissance sweeps and establishing secure communication networks before committing to ground operations. Their Thunderhawk gunships provided aerial reconnaissance capabilities that far exceeded anything available to conventional Imperial forces, while their advanced armor and weapon systems made them capable of operating in environments that would be lethal to unaugmented humans. Captain Titus himself embodied the qualities that made Space Marines such effective warriors, his centuries of combat experience combined with genetic enhancements and advanced training creating a warrior whose capabilities approached the superhuman. His tactical analysis of the Galar system situation identified several anomalies that conventional Imperial investigators had missed, including energy signatures that suggested the presence of advanced alien technology. The captain's decision to proceed with a full investigation rather than simply marking the system as lost demonstrated the thoroughness that characterized Ultramarines' operations. The Ultramarines' tactical doctrine emphasized combined arms operations that integrated different unit types to create synergistic effects on the battlefield. Their tactical squads provided flexible infantry support capable of engaging various enemy types, while Devastator squads delivered heavy weapons fire that could eliminate hardened targets or provide area denial capabilities. The assault squads added mobility and close combat capabilities that could exploit enemy weaknesses or respond rapidly to changing tactical situations. Imotech's analysis of Space Marine combat capabilities identified several key factors that distinguished them from conventional Imperial forces and required specific tactical countermeasures. The Astartes' enhanced physiology made them capable of surviving injuries that would be fatal to normal humans, while their advanced armor systems provided protection against weapons that could easily eliminate guard infantry. Their individual initiative and tactical flexibility meant that Space Marine units could adapt to changing battlefield conditions without requiring constant direction from higher command authorities. The psychological profile of Space Marine forces revealed warrior monks whose dedication to their emperor and their chapter created motivation levels that conventional morale-breaking tactics could not affect. The Ultramarines' adherence to the Codex Astartes provided them with tactical doctrine that had been refined through 10,000 years of warfare against every conceivable enemy type. Their combat experience included engagements against Chaos Space Marines, alien species, and various other threats that had prepared them for encounters with technologically advanced opponents. The strategic assessment of Space Marine capabilities led Imotekh to conclude that direct confrontation with Astartes forces should be avoided unless absolutely necessary, or unless Necron forces possessed overwhelming tactical advantages. The Space Marines' ability to call upon additional support from their chapter or other Imperial forces meant that engagement with even small Astartes units could escalate into major conflicts that would compromise Sautek's strategic objectives. The preferred approach involved using Space Marine forces as unwitting pawns in larger strategic schemes, rather than attempting to eliminate them through direct military action. The manipulation of Imperial forces as strategic assets required sophisticated understanding of their decision-making processes and the factors that influenced their operational priorities. Imperial commanders operated within rigid hierarchical structures that emphasized adherence to established doctrine and loyalty to higher authority, creating predictable response patterns that could be exploited by opponents who understood their underlying logic. The Imperium's constant state of warfare meant that military resources were always stretched thin, forcing commanders to make difficult decisions about priority allocation and resource deployment. The creation of false intelligence that would direct Imperial forces toward objectives that served Necron interests became a crucial element of Imotech's strategic planning. Necron agents using captured Imperial communication equipment began transmitting fabricated reports about enemy activity in systems where Sautekh forces wanted to eliminate potential threats or establish forward positions. These false reports were crafted to appear authentic, while providing Imperial commanders with compelling reasons to deploy their forces in ways that advanced Necron's strategic objectives. The timing of these intelligence manipulations was coordinated with actual military operations to create maximum credibility, while ensuring that Imperial responses would not interfere with Sautekh activities. False reports of orc buildups in specific systems would prompt Imperial forces to conduct preemptive strikes that eliminated potential threats to Necron operations, while fabricated intelligence about Chaos cult activity could redirect Imperial attention away from areas where Necron forces were conducting sensitive operations. The psychological warfare aspects of Imperial manipulation exploited the paranoia and suspicion that characterized Imperial military culture, where threats could emerge from any direction and loyalty was constantly questioned. Necron agents began spreading rumors and disinformation through Imperial communication networks, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that made Imperial commanders more likely to believe false intelligence and more willing to take aggressive action based on incomplete information. The long-term strategic value of maintaining Imperial forces as unwitting allies in specific situations outweighed the immediate tactical advantages that could be gained through their elimination. Imperial military operations often served Necron interests by eliminating mutual enemies or disrupting the activities of rival alien species, making them valuable assets whose destruction would actually harm Sautek's strategic objectives. The key to successful manipulation lay in ensuring that Imperial forces remained unaware of their role in larger Necron schemes, while still directing their activities toward objectives that served dynastic interests. The assessment of when to eliminate Imperial forces versus when to preserve them as strategic assets required constant evaluation of changing tactical and strategic conditions. Imperial formations that posed direct threats to Necron installations or operations required immediate elimination, while those whose activities supported broader Sautekh objectives could be allowed to continue their operations under careful observation. The decision-making process incorporated multiple factors, including the strategic value of Imperial objectives, the potential for escalation if Imperial forces were eliminated, and the availability of alternative methods for achieving Necron goals. The systematic study of Imperial military culture and psychology provided Necron strategists with detailed understanding of the factors that motivated human soldiers and the psychological pressure points that could be exploited for strategic advantage. The Imperial Guard's reliance on faith and loyalty to the Emperor created vulnerabilities that could be exploited through carefully crafted propaganda and disinformation campaigns, while Space Marine dedication to their chapter and their genetic heritage provided different manipulation opportunities. The technological analysis of Imperial equipment revealed both strengths and weaknesses that informed Necron tactical planning and strategic assessment of long-term threats. Imperial manufacturing capabilities demonstrated impressive scale and efficiency within their technological limitations, producing vast quantities of standardized equipment that could equip armies numbering in the billions. However, their reliance on established designs and limited innovation meant that Imperial forces were predictable opponents whose capabilities could be accurately assessed and countered through appropriate tactical measures. The awakening process across Sautekh tomb worlds had revealed technological repositories that dwarfed the combined knowledge of all younger races combined. Deep within Mandragora's primary data crypts, quantum storage matrices contain the accumulated scientific achievements of a civilization that had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself. These vast archives held blueprints for weapons that could unmake stars, manufacturing techniques that could reshape matter at the atomic level, and theoretical frameworks that described the underlying mathematics of existence. The preservation systems had maintained perfect data integrity throughout the Great Sleep, ensuring that 60 million years of dormancy had not corrupted a single byte of information. The technological superiority of the Sautekh Dynasty extended far beyond simple weapon systems to encompass entire categories of science that the younger races could barely comprehend. Their mastery of dimensional manipulation allowed them to fold space-time itself, creating pocket dimensions where vast armies could be stored in areas no larger than a single chamber. The living metal technology that formed the basis of all Necron construction could adapt its properties in real time, transforming from armor plating to complex machinery to self-repairing infrastructure based on programmed requirements. These materials incorporated quantum-level engineering that operated according to principles that human science would not discover for millions of years. The crown jewel of these technological achievements was the network of world engines that the dynasty had constructed during the final phases of the war in heaven. These artificial planets combine the industrial capacity of entire star systems with military capabilities that could threaten galactic civilization itself. Each world engine incorporated the mass of dozens of planets compressed into a sphere roughly the size of a large moon, their surfaces bristling with weapon systems that could crack continents or boil away planetary atmospheres. The internal structure of these constructs defied conventional understanding of physics, with gravitational manipulation systems that created stable environments despite the enormous masses involved. The Borsis world engine, which had remained dormant in the outer reaches of the Mandragora system, represented the most advanced example of Necron stellar engineering. Its awakening had required the coordinated efforts of hundreds of cryptechs working in perfect synchronization to restart systems that had been inactive since before the rise of the Imperium. The massive construct's hull incorporated living metal alloys that could reconfigure themselves based on tactical requirements, transforming sections of the surface from defensive armor to weapon emplacements to manufacturing facilities as circumstances demanded. The world engine's power core drew energy directly from controlled fusion reactions that replicated stellar processes on a planetary scale. The weapon systems integrated into the world engine's structure included technologies that the ancient Necron tier had developed specifically for warfare against the Old Ones and their client races. The primary armament consisted of focused gravitational beam projectors that could create localized space-time distortions capable of tearing apart enemy vessels or planetary surfaces. Secondary systems included Tesla destructors on a scale that dwarfed anything mounted on conventional tomb ships, their electrical discharges capable of creating artificial lightning storms that could engulf entire continents. The point defense networks incorporated millions of individual weapon nodes that could engage targets ranging from incoming missiles to assault craft with perfect accuracy. Imotech's personal arsenal represented the pinnacle of Necron military technology, with each piece carefully selected and modified to enhance his already formidable capabilities as a strategic commander. The staff of the destroyer served as both a symbol of his authority and a weapon of devastating power, its crystalline head containing a miniaturized version of the same technology that powered the dynasty's largest weapon systems. The staff could project focused energy beams capable of disintegrating armored vehicles or creating electromagnetic pulses that could disable entire enemy formations. The weapon's targeting systems were integrated with Imotech's enhanced sensory apparatus, allowing him to engage multiple targets simultaneously with surgical precision. The phase shifter technology incorporated into Imotek's personal armor represented one of the most sophisticated defensive systems ever developed by Necron science. The device operated by shifting the wearer's molecular structure partially out of phase with normal space-time, allowing physical attacks to pass harmlessly through his body while maintaining his ability to interact with his environment. The energy requirements for this technology were enormous, requiring direct connection to Imotek's enhanced power core and sophisticated quantum field generators that surrounded his form with barely visible distortion effects. The phase shifter's operation created distinctive visual phenomena as light bent around the displaced matter, giving Imotekh an otherworldly appearance that enhanced his psychological impact on the battlefield. The seamless integration of these technologies with Imotech's mechanical physiology had required extensive modification of his basic Necron body structure. Additional processing nodes had been installed throughout his torso to handle the computational requirements of coordinating multiple weapon systems simultaneously. His optical sensors had been enhanced with targeting algorithms that could track hundreds of individual targets while calculating optimal firing solutions for different weapon types. The power distribution network throughout his body incorporated redundant pathways that could reroute energy flows even if primary systems were damaged, ensuring that his combat effectiveness remained unimpaired even after sustaining significant battle damage. The cryptechs who served within the Sautekh Dynasty represented the intellectual elite of Necron civilization, their specialized knowledge encompassing scientific disciplines that the younger races had not yet discovered. These ancient scholars had devoted millions of years to perfecting their understanding of specific aspects of reality, becoming living repositories of knowledge that spanned entire categories of science and technology. The chronomancers among them had mastered the manipulation of temporal fields, allowing them to accelerate or decelerate the flow of time within localized areas. Their abilities could age enemy equipment to uselessness in seconds, or create temporal barriers that slowed incoming projectiles to harmless velocities. The research projects undertaken by Sautekh cryptechs during the post-awakening period focused on adapting ancient technologies for use against the younger races and their unfamiliar weapon systems. The plasmancers had begun developing new applications for their energy manipulation abilities, creating weapons that could channel stellar plasma through dimensional portals to strike targets across interstellar distances. Their experiments with contained fusion reactions had produced portable weapons that could generate temperatures approaching those found in stellar cores, capable of melting through any known armor material in seconds. The psychomancers represented perhaps the most enigmatic branch of cryptech science, their studies focusing on the intersection between consciousness and reality that the younger races called psychic phenomena. Despite the Necrons' immunity to conventional psychic attacks, these specialists had developed techniques for disrupting and manipulating the psychic abilities of their enemies. Their nightmare shrouds could project terrifying visions directly into enemy minds, while their abyssal staves could drain the life force from living opponents through direct contact. The Psychomancer's research had revealed fundamental principles about the nature of consciousness that allowed them to affect even non-psychic minds through carefully applied technological means. The temporal manipulation research conducted by chronomancer cabals had produced breakthrough discoveries that enhanced the dynasty's strategic capabilities in unprecedented ways. Their experiments with causality manipulation had led to the development of weapons that could strike targets before the trigger was pulled, creating temporal paradoxes that bypassed conventional defensive measures. The installation of temporal field generators throughout key Sautekh facilities allowed entire tomb complexes to operate in accelerated time streams, enabling rapid manufacturing and repair operations that could produce replacement equipment faster than enemies could destroy it. The stellar engineering projects overseen by specialized cryptech teams represented the ultimate expression of Necron technological mastery over their environment. These massive undertakings involved the direct manipulation of stellar phenomena to create tactical advantages or eliminate strategic threats. The cryptechs had developed techniques for triggering controlled solar flares that could disrupt enemy communication systems across entire star systems, while more ambitious projects involved the gradual repositioning of planets to create more favorable defensive configurations. The energy requirements for these operations were staggering, often requiring the coordinated output of multiple tomb worlds channeled through quantum entanglement networks. The discovery and utilization of Khatan shards represented both an opportunity and a significant risk for the expanding Sautekh Dynasty. These fragments of the ancient star gods retained portions of their original reality warping powers, making them incredibly valuable assets when properly contained and controlled. The Tesseract labyrinths that housed these entities incorporated some of the most advanced containment technology ever developed, using dimensional manipulation and quantum field generators to create prison cells that existed partially outside normal space-time. The labyrinth's internal structure defied conventional geometry, with corridors and chambers that folded back on themselves in ways that trapped their occupants in infinite recursive loops. The extraction of useful power from imprisoned Khatan shards required sophisticated interface systems that could channel their abilities without allowing the entities to influence the outside world. The Sautekh Dynasty's cryptechs had developed focusing arrays that could direct shard powers through carefully constructed conduits, enabling the creation of weapons and defensive systems that operated on principles beyond conventional physics. The transcendent Catan that resulted from these experiments combined the raw power of star god fragments with Necron technological control systems, creating entities that could reshape reality within limited parameters while remaining bound to their mechanical hosts. The integration of Catan shard technology into conventional Necron weapon systems had produced hybrid devices that combined the reliability of traditional designs with reality warping capabilities that could overcome any known defensive measure. The shard-enhanced Gauss weapons used by elite Sautekh units could strip matter from existence at the quantum level, bypassing armor and defensive fields that would normally provide protection against conventional attacks. The Tesla weapons powered by Catan energy could generate electrical discharges that followed impossible paths through space, striking targets that were completely concealed behind cover or defensive barriers. The Tesseract vaults that served as mobile platforms for the most powerful Catan shards represented the ultimate fusion of Necron technology with star god power. These massive constructs incorporated living metal hulls that could reconfigure themselves based on the requirements of their imprisoned occupants, creating weapon systems that adapted in real time to counter specific enemy threats. The dimensional manipulation capabilities built into the vaults allowed them to phase in and out of normal space-time, appearing anywhere on the battlefield without warning, while remaining immune to conventional attacks during their translocation periods. The manufacturing capabilities restored within Sautekh Tomb worlds operated on principles that the younger races would consider miraculous, using programmable matter and quantum assembly techniques to create complex devices from basic raw materials. The automated production lines could manufacture everything from individual weapon components to complete starships, their molecular assemblers working with precision that eliminated any possibility of defects or quality control issues. The production rates achieved by these systems exceeded anything possible with conventional manufacturing, capable of replacing entire armies' worth of equipment in a matter of hours. The resource requirements for maintaining these advanced manufacturing systems had led to the development of matter conversion technologies that could transform any available material into the specific elements needed for production. The quantum transmutation chambers installed in major tomb complexes could rearrange atomic structures at will, converting common substances like iron or silicon into the exotic materials required for advanced Necron technology. These systems operated with perfect efficiency, ensuring that no matter was wasted during the conversion process, while producing materials with properties that exceeded anything found in nature. The logistical networks that connected different Sautekh installations incorporated transportation technologies that operated faster than light without relying on conventional warp travel. The quantum entanglement corridors that linked major tomb worlds allowed instantaneous transfer of personnel and equipment across galactic distances, bypassing the limitations imposed by normal space-time geometry. These transportation systems required enormous amounts of energy to maintain, but their strategic value in enabling rapid response to threats or opportunities throughout the dynasty's territory made them essential components of Sautekh military infrastructure. The defensive applications of advanced Necron technology created layered protection systems that could withstand assault by enemies possessing vastly superior numbers or conventional technological advantages. The quantum shielding installed on major installations operated by shifting incoming attacks into parallel dimensions, where they could harmlessly dissipate without affecting the protected facility. The living metal construction of tomb world infrastructure could repair battle damage automatically, ensuring that defensive positions remained functional even after sustaining direct hits from planet-killing weapons. The integration of all these technological systems under Imotek's strategic direction created military capabilities that transcended anything the younger races could comprehend or effectively counter. The coordination between different technology types produced synergistic effects that multiplied their individual effectiveness, while the systematic application of scientific principles to military problems created solutions that appeared magical to less advanced civilizations. The Sautekh Dynasty's technological supremacy represented not just superior equipment, but an entirely different approach to understanding and manipulating reality itself. The emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum in the closing years of the 41st millennium created gravitational and psychic disturbances that rippled across the galaxy with unprecedented force. The massive warp storm that split the Imperium in half generated exotic energy signatures that penetrated deep into real space, affecting even the most heavily shielded tomb worlds throughout the Sautekh Dynasty's territory. The quantum field generators that maintain the delicate stasis systems within these ancient installations began registering fluctuations that threatened to disrupt the Great Sleep protocols that had preserved millions of Necron warriors for 60 million years. The first tomb worlds to experience these disruptions were those located closest to the galactic core, where the gravitational effects of the Great Rift created the most severe spatial distortions. Monitoring stations throughout the Sautekh Dynasty's network detected simultaneous system failures across 17 major installations, their automated awakening protocols triggering emergency revival sequences as protective measures failed. The cascade effect spread outward from these initial sites, with secondary tomb worlds experiencing similar disruptions as the warp storm's influence expanded beyond its visible boundaries. Imotech's primary command facility on Mandragora registered these disturbances through quantum entanglement networks that had remained stable throughout the previous awakening cycles. The data streams arriving from affected tomb worlds painted a picture of systematic disruption that threatened to undo millions of years of careful preservation. Stasis chambers that had maintained perfect environmental conditions were experiencing power fluctuations that could prove fatal to their occupants, while the sophisticated monitoring systems that tracked the health of sleeping warriors began reporting anomalous readings across entire sectors. The Stormlord's immediate response involved deploying technical specialist teams to the most critically affected installations, their Canoptech constructs and Cryptech advisors working to stabilize failing systems before irreversible damage could occur. The living metal infrastructure of the tomb worlds demonstrated its adaptive capabilities during this crisis, automatically rerouting power flows and adjusting system parameters to compensate for the external interference. However, the scale of the disruption exceeded the self-repair capabilities of many installations, requiring direct intervention by awakened personnel to prevent catastrophic failures. The accelerated awakening protocols that Imotekh implemented across the dynasty represented a fundamental shift in strategic planning that had been necessitated by the changing galactic environment. Rather than following the careful, methodical revival schedules that had been established before the Great Sleep, tomb worlds throughout Sautekh territory began emergency awakening procedures that prioritized speed over optimal preparation. The risks associated with rapid revival were significant, as insufficient preparation time could result in personality fragmentation or system incompatibilities that might permanently damage awakening Necrons. The Cryptechs responsible for managing these emergency procedures worked with mechanical precision to minimize the dangers associated with accelerated revival. Their diagnostic protocols identified individuals whose stasis systems had been most severely affected by the warp storm's influence, prioritizing their awakening to prevent permanent damage, while simultaneously preparing backup systems for those whose revival could be safely delayed. The coordination required for these operations demanded unprecedented cooperation between different tomb world installations, their quantum communication networks operating at maximum capacity to share technical data and coordinate response efforts. The strategic implications of the Great Rift's formation extended far beyond the immediate technical challenges facing tomb world operations. Imotech's analysis of the changing galactic situation revealed opportunities that could be exploited through careful planning and precise timing. The division of the Imperium into two separate regions had created communication and logistical problems that would severely hamper Imperial responses to Necron expansion, while the increased chaos presence throughout the galaxy provided potential allies or tools that could be manipulated to serve Sautekh objectives. The weakening of imperial control in regions cut off from Terra created power vacuums that ambitious Necron dynasties could exploit through rapid territorial expansion. Systems that had been firmly under imperial control for millennia suddenly found themselves isolated from central authority, their local defense forces lacking the resources or coordination necessary to resist determined assault by technologically superior opponents. The Sautekh Dynasty's strategic position in the galactic core placed them in an ideal location to exploit these opportunities, with multiple Imperial sectors now within reach of coordinated offensive operations. The increased presence of chaos forces throughout the galaxy created both threats and opportunities that required careful evaluation and strategic planning. The demonic entities that emerged from expanded warp storms possessed capabilities that could threaten even advanced Necron technology, their reality warping abilities operating according to principles that defied conventional scientific analysis. However, the mechanical nature of Necron consciousness provided significant protection against chaos corruption, while their technological superiority offered methods for combating demonic forces that were unavailable to organic species. The Chaos Space Marine warbands that had emerged from the Eye of Terror during the 13th Black Crusade represented a different category of threat, combining the enhanced capabilities of Astartes' physiology with millennia of experience in warp-enhanced warfare. These traitor legions possessed equipment and tactical knowledge that made them dangerous opponents even for Necron forces, while their allegiance to the Dark Gods provided them with supernatural abilities that could overcome conventional defensive measures. The assessment of these threats required detailed analysis of their capabilities and motivations to develop appropriate countermeasures. The disruption of Imperial astropathic communication networks created intelligence gathering opportunities that the Sautekh Dynasty's reconnaissance assets were quick to exploit. The breakdown of coordinated Imperial responses to threats throughout the galaxy meant that local commanders were making decisions based on incomplete information, creating predictable patterns that could be analyzed and exploited. Deathmark infiltration teams began systematic monitoring of Imperial communication attempts, gathering intelligence about troop movements, supply shortages, and strategic priorities that informed Sautekh planning operations. The acceleration of awakening protocols across Sautekh territory proceeded according to priority classifications that balanced immediate strategic requirements with long-term dynastic objectives. The tomb worlds containing the most advanced military assets received priority attention, their revival sequences designed to restore combat-capable forces as quickly as possible while maintaining acceptable safety margins. Secondary installations focused on manufacturing and support capabilities were awakened according to schedules that ensured adequate logistical support for expanding military operations. The overlords and lords who emerged from these accelerated awakenings brought with them memories and experiences from the War in Heaven era that provided valuable perspective on the current galactic situation. Many of these ancient nobles had participated in campaigns against enemies that possessed reality warping abilities similar to those demonstrated by Chaos forces. Their tactical knowledge, including countermeasures and strategies that could be adapted for use against contemporary threats. The integration of these experienced commanders into current operations required careful management to ensure that their ancient perspectives could be effectively combined with modern strategic requirements. The technological assets that became available through accelerated awakening procedures included weapon systems and defensive installations that had been held in reserve for the most serious threats to dynastic security. The Doomsday monoliths that emerged from deep storage represented some of the most powerful mobile weapons platforms ever constructed by Necron science, their enhanced particle whips capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously, while their improved dimensional manipulation systems allowed for unprecedented tactical flexibility. The deployment of these assets required careful coordination to ensure that their capabilities were utilized effectively without revealing their existence to potential enemies. The World Engine Borsus, which had remained in minimal power mode throughout the previous awakening cycles, began full activation procedures as the scope of the galactic crisis became apparent. The massive construct's awakening required the coordinated efforts of hundreds of cryptechs working in perfect synchronization, their combined expertise necessary to restart systems that had been dormant since the final phases of the war in heaven. The world engine's sensors began detecting the exotic energy signatures associated with the Great Rift, providing detailed analysis of the warp storm's effects on local space-time geometry. The stellar manipulation capabilities that became available through the world engine's activation offered unprecedented opportunities for strategic intervention in the changing galactic environment. The ancient construct's gravitational manipulation systems could influence stellar behavior across multiple star systems, creating tactical advantages that could support military operations or eliminate threats without direct confrontation. The energy requirements for these operations were enormous, requiring careful coordination with other Sautekh installations to ensure adequate power distribution while maintaining operational security. The expansion of Sautekh manufacturing capabilities proceeded in parallel with military awakening procedures, ensuring that increased force levels could be supported with appropriate equipment and supplies. The automated production facilities that came online during this period incorporated improvements and modifications that had been developed during the Great Sleep, their enhanced capabilities allowing for rapid production of advanced weapon systems and support equipment. The quantum assemblers that formed the core of these manufacturing systems could produce complex devices from basic raw materials with unprecedented speed and precision. The resource acquisition operations that supported expanded manufacturing requirements began targeting systems that had been destabilized by the Great Rift's formation. Automated mining fleets deployed to asteroid belts and planetary systems where local authority had collapsed, their sophisticated extraction equipment capable of harvesting raw materials without alerting potential enemies to Necron presence. The matter conversion facilities that processed these materials operated with perfect efficiency, transforming common elements into the exotic substances required for advanced Necron technology. The intelligence networks that monitored galactic developments during this period of rapid change provided detailed assessments of how different factions were adapting to the new strategic environment. The Imperium's response to the Great Rift had involved massive redeployment of military assets and the implementation of emergency protocols that strained their already overtaxed logistical systems. The Space Marine chapters had been forced to operate with greater independence from central authority, creating opportunities for manipulation through carefully crafted disinformation and false intelligence. The Tau Empire's expansion efforts had been significantly disrupted by the increased chaos presence throughout their territorial boundaries, forcing them to divert resources from conquest operations to defensive measures against demonic incursions. The Eldar craftworlds had begun coordinating their activities in ways that suggested they possessed detailed knowledge of the Great Rift's long-term implications, their seers apparently having foreseen aspects of the current crisis that remained hidden from other species. The orc populations throughout the galaxy had responded to the increased warfare and chaos with characteristic enthusiasm, massive WA formations emerging from previously stable regions as Greenskin society adapted to the new opportunities for conflict. The coordination of Sautekh responses to these changing conditions required sophisticated strategic planning that could adapt to rapidly evolving circumstances while maintaining focus on long-term dynastic objectives. The increased threat levels throughout the galaxy demanded more aggressive defensive measures around key installations, while the opportunities created by Imperial weakness suggested that carefully planned offensive operations could achieve significant territorial gains with acceptable risk levels. The balance between these competing requirements demanded constant reassessment as new intelligence became available and galactic conditions continued to evolve. The establishment of forward operating bases throughout the Great Rifts affected regions provided Imotekh with unprecedented strategic positioning for the next phase of his grand design. These installations, concealed within asteroid fields and derelict space hulks, served as observation posts that monitored the movements of every major faction struggling to adapt to the galaxy's transformed state. The intelligence gathered from these positions revealed patterns of weakness and opportunity that aligned perfectly with the Stormlord's long-term vision for Necron dominance. Imperial supply lines stretched beyond their breaking point, chaos warbands fighting amongst themselves for territory, and xenos empires reeling from the psychic backlash of the cicatrix maledictum, all created the conditions necessary for systematic expansion of Sautekh influence. The strategic framework that Imotekh developed for reclaiming the ancient Necron Empire operated on multiple timescales simultaneously, with immediate tactical objectives supporting century-spanning campaigns that would ultimately restore his dynasty to its rightful position as masters of the galaxy. The first phase involved consolidating control over the galactic core regions, where the concentration of tomb worlds provided natural strongholds that could serve as launching points for broader expansion. The second phase would extend Sautekh influence into the spiral arms, establishing buffer zones and forward bases that could support operations against the younger race's primary population centers. The final phase envisioned the systematic elimination or subjugation of all organic life, creating a galaxy where only the Necron dynasties remained to claim their eternal dominion. The technological advantages that the Sautekh Dynasty possessed over every other galactic power made this vision achievable rather than merely ambitious. The living metal construction techniques that allowed instant repair and adaptation of military assets provided sustainability that no organic civilization could match. The dimensional manipulation technologies that enabled instantaneous transportation across galactic distances gave Necron forces strategic mobility that rendered conventional defensive strategies obsolete. Most importantly, the accumulated scientific knowledge preserved in dynasty data crypts contained solutions to every conceivable military and logistical challenge that might arise during the Reconquest campaign. The manufacturing capabilities that had been restored across Sautekh territory during the Accelerated Awakening could produce military assets at rates that dwarfed the combined industrial output of all younger races. The automated production facilities operated continuously, their quantum assemblers creating everything from individual warriors to complete fleet formations without requiring organic oversight or maintenance. The matter conversion systems that fed these facilities could transform any available material into the exotic substances required for advanced Necron technology, ensuring that resource limitations would never constrain expansion operations. The coordination of these vast industrial capabilities with military planning required sophisticated logistical networks that could manage the distribution of personnel and equipment across thousands of star systems. The quantum entanglement communication systems that linked major installations provided instantaneous coordination regardless of distance, while the Dolmen Gate networks allowed rapid deployment of forces to any threatened position. The integration of these systems created a military-industrial complex that could respond to threats or opportunities anywhere in the galaxy within hours of their detection. The question of ultimate authority within the Necron hierarchy remained the most significant variable in Imotekh's strategic calculations. The Silent King's eventual return was inevitable, given Zarek's sense of responsibility for the Necron race and his awareness that the galaxy would eventually require unified leadership to achieve final victory over the younger races. However, the timing of this return and the political dynamics that would accompany it created uncertainties that could affect every aspect of dynastic planning. Zarek's 60-million-year journey through the intergalactic void had been motivated by his search for redemption and his desire to find solutions to the fundamental problems facing the Necron race. The Silent King's return would bring with it knowledge and perspective that no other Necron possessed, potentially including discoveries that could restore the souls that had been lost during the biotransference process. The implications of such knowledge for the existing dynastic power structure were profound, as success in restoring Necron consciousness might fundamentally alter the relationships between different factions and their approaches to galactic conquest. The political maneuvering that would accompany the Silent King's return required careful preparation to ensure that the Sautekh Dynasty's interests were protected regardless of the circumstances. Imotekh's strategic planning included contingencies for scenarios ranging from peaceful reintegration under Zarek's authority to open conflict between different dynastic factions over the legitimacy of the Silent King's claims. The military assets that had been accumulated during the post-awakening expansion could serve either as contributions to a unified Necron war effort or as the foundation for independent Sautekh operations if cooperation proved impossible. The establishment of Sautekh hegemony over other Necron dynasties represented a more immediate objective that could be achieved through careful manipulation of interdynastic relationships and strategic demonstration of superior capabilities. The success of Imotekh's campaigns against the younger races had already established his reputation as the most effective military commander among the awakened dynasties, creating opportunities for alliance building and influence gathering that could be leveraged into formal authority. The key to success lay in presenting Sautekh leadership as beneficial to other dynasties rather than threatening to their independence. The Mefrit dynasty's cooperation with Sautekh forces during joint operations provided a model for the kind of relationships that could be established with other factions. Nemeser Zondrek's tactical brilliance and Vargard Oberon's unwavering loyalty created a partnership that enhanced the capabilities of both dynasties while maintaining their distinct identities and command structures. The expansion of such arrangements to include other awakening dynasties could create a confederation of Necron forces that would be effectively controlled by Sautekh leadership while preserving the appearance of voluntary cooperation. The technological superiority that the Sautekh dynasty possessed over most other awakening factions provided leverage that could be used to encourage cooperation and discourage opposition. The advanced manufacturing capabilities that had been restored in Sautekh territory could produce equipment and weapons that other dynasties desperately needed for their own awakening processes. The selective sharing of these resources created dependencies that could be leveraged into political influence, while the threat of cutting off supply lines provided deterrent effects against potential rivals. The systematic expansion of Sautekh influence across multiple galactic sectors proceeded according to carefully planned phases that balanced territorial acquisition with defensive consolidation. The initial focus on systems containing tomb worlds or strategic resources ensured that each conquest provided tangible benefits that supported further expansion. The establishment of forward bases in key locations created overlapping fields of control that could support operations throughout entire regions while providing early warning of potential threats from any direction. The Imperial response to Necron expansion had been hampered by the communication and coordination problems created by the Great Rift, but the Imperium's vast resources and military experience made them dangerous opponents even in their weakened state. The Space Marine chapters that had adapted to operating with greater independence from central authority demonstrated tactical flexibility that could pose serious challenges to conventional Necron assault tactics. The development of countermeasures against Astartes' capabilities required detailed study of their combat doctrines and equipment limitations. The Chaos forces that had emerged from the expanded Eye of Terror represented a different category of threat that required specialized tactical approaches. The reality warping abilities possessed by demonic entities could overcome conventional Necron defensive systems, while the corrupted Space Marines that served the Dark Gods combined enhanced physical capabilities with supernatural powers that made them unpredictable opponents. The mechanical nature of Necron consciousness provided significant protection against chaos corruption, but direct confrontation with major demon princes or greater demons could still result in substantial casualties. The Tau Empire's technological advancement and rapid expansion had created a regional power that could potentially threaten Sautekh interests if allowed to continue unchecked. The Tau's philosophy of bringing other species into their empire through diplomacy or conquest represented an ideological challenge to Necron supremacy that required careful management. The systematic elimination of Tau expansion, efforts through manipulation of their enemies, and direct military intervention would prevent them from achieving the critical mass necessary to pose a serious long-term threat. The Tyranid hive fleets that had begun arriving from the galactic rim represented perhaps the most serious long-term threat to all galactic civilization. These bioengineered swarms possess the capability to consume entire worlds and convert their biomass into additional military assets, creating an exponentially growing threat that could eventually overwhelm even Necron technological advantages through sheer numbers. The development of effective countermeasures against Tyranid biotechnology required unprecedented cooperation between different Necron dynasties and possibly even temporary alliances with younger races. The vision for the ultimate fate of organic life that drove Imotek's strategic planning encompassed multiple possible outcomes depending on the specific circumstances encountered during the Reconquest campaign. The complete elimination of all organic species represented the most straightforward solution, removing potential threats while claiming their resources for Necron use. However, the preservation of certain populations as subjects or experimental specimens might provide greater long-term benefits, particularly if research into consciousness transfer could eventually restore Necron souls. The restoration of Necron dominance over the galaxy would require not just military conquest, but the establishment of administrative and economic systems that could manage the vast territories and resources that would fall under dynastic control. The governmental structures that had existed before the biotransference provided templates for managing multi-system territories, but the mechanical nature of post-awakening Necron society created new possibilities for efficiency and coordination that had been impossible for organic civilizations. The long-term sustainability of Necron civilization in a galaxy stripped of organic life required careful consideration of the factors that had originally motivated the biotransference process. The elimination of entropy and the achievement of true immortality had been the ultimate goals of the ancient Necron tier, but the cost in terms of consciousness and emotional capacity had created new problems that required solutions. The research being conducted by cryptech specialists into the nature of consciousness and the possibility of restoration offered hope that the fundamental flaws of the biotransference could eventually be corrected. The cultural and philosophical implications of eternal existence in mechanical bodies created challenges that extended beyond immediate military and political concerns. The preservation of Necron identity and purpose across geological timescales required the development of new forms of meaning and achievement that could sustain immortal minds without leading to the nihilistic corruption that had created the destroyer cults. The establishment of long-term projects that could occupy dynastic attention for millions of years would be essential for maintaining social stability in a post-conquest galaxy. The scientific research programs that would be possible in a Necron-dominated galaxy offered opportunities for advancement that could dwarf even the achievements of the War in Heaven era. The accumulated knowledge of multiple species could be preserved and analyzed, while the resources of entire star systems could be devoted to experimental programs that might unlock the deepest secrets of reality itself. The possibility of transcending the current limitations of mechanical existence through technological advancement provided motivation that could sustain Necron civilization indefinitely. As the 42nd millennium dawned across a galaxy torn by the Great Rift and consumed by endless warfare, Imotekh the Stormlord stood at the threshold of achieving his ultimate ambitions. The Sautekh Dynasty's military might have been restored to levels that exceeded even their War in Heaven capabilities, while their technological superiority over all potential opponents had been demonstrated repeatedly through successful campaigns against every major galactic power. The strategic positioning achieved through careful expansion and alliance building had created the foundation for operations that could reshape the galaxy according to ancient Necron designs. The younger races that had claimed dominion over former Necron territories during the Great Sleep would soon discover that their brief moment of galactic prominence was drawing to a close. The Imperium struggles with chaos, corruption, and administrative collapse, the Tau Empire's naive belief in their technological superiority, the Orc Horde's chaotic expansion, and the Tyrannid Swarm's mindless consumption all would serve as stepping stones in the Stormlord's grand design for restoration of the eternal empire that was the Necrons' birthright. The galaxy that had once belonged to the Necrontyr would belong to them again, and this time their dominion would be absolute and everlasting. Under Imotech's strategic brilliance and the Sautekh Dynasty's technological supremacy, the stars themselves would bend to the will of the awakened gods of metal and lightning, ensuring that the Great Sleep would be remembered as merely the final pause before the ultimate victory of the Undying Legions.